button, and when you're Are the meeting platform hosts ready to begin?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, are you ready to begin the hearing?
Yes.
Please provide a 5-second countdown.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good morning. I call this hearing to order. A quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. The committee procedures for remote hearings remain the same. If you are experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff are designated, or you or your staff contact our designated technical support so those issues can be resolved immediately. If you wish to have a document inserted into the record, please ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email the document to veteransAffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of seniority for questioning witnesses today. This will make it easier for me to ensure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. Does any member have a question about the procedures for this hearing? Hearing none, we'll proceed. Before I begin with my opening statement, I'd like to ask us to take a moment of silence to observe two things which make this day a particularly somber day. One, today is December 7th, which was the day that the Japanese invaded or attacked Pearl Harbor. And we lost thousands of very good Americans that day. Second, our colleague Don McEachin is being remembered today in his district, and many members of this committee are there at his memorial. So for those two reasons, I would like to take a moment of silence to respect and honor both Mr. McEachin and those who perished on this day in 1941. Thank you. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. Once again, good morning to everyone joining us today for this important hearing on fulfilling our PACT, ensuring effective implementation of toxic exposure legislation. I greatly appreciate all our panelists being here today, and likewise thank you to all of those in the audience and listening online. The passage and signing into law of my Honoring Our PACT Act earlier this year was the culmination of years of hard work among members of Congress, our staffs, the VA, VSOs, and the veterans, families, and loved ones of those tragically impacted by the effects of toxic exposure. But this effort also represented a monumental sea change in how our nation treats our toxic exposed veterans. Congress and the public now recognize toxic exposure as a cost of war. No longer will these veterans have to fight their own government to obtain the health care and benefits they have earned and deserve. No longer will they be forced to prove their illness is tied to their service. Instead, these veterans' illnesses will be presumed to be service-connected, streamlining access to care and benefits for over 3.5 million veterans. Moreover, this bill changes the old paradigm of pitting one veterans program against another, or against other domestic spending programs. It also changes the way VA is to approach future presumptive illnesses so that hopefully veterans will no longer have to wait years or decades or for an act of Congress to receive recognition for their illnesses. But now that hard work of passing this legislation into law is over, the hard work of implementing it begins. And make no mistake, it will be hard work. The Honoring Our PACT Act is as massive as it is significant. And given its transformative nature, it will, by definition, present implementation challenges and concerns, which is why we find ourselves here today to speak with VA regarding the barriers and opportunities we face with this legislation. The first hurdle, of course, is ensuring that veterans know about and understand the benefits that are available to them as a result of this legislation. I know VA has dedicated a lot of time and effort to this issue, and I'm sure we will hear more about that during this hearing. The second biggest challenge, of course, will be the large and rapid expansion of new entrants into the VA healthcare system. The PACT Act necessarily expands healthcare access to millions of veterans, and in order to cope with that, the bill also provides greater resources and authority to VA to hire healthcare workers and allows VA to open or expand dozens of new healthcare facilities. So I look forward to hearing more from the VA officials here today about how they intend to use these new authorities. The PACT Act also introduces countless new disability claims to the system, nearly 165,000 at last count. So a robust discussion on VA's plan to deal with those claims without adding to an already large claims backlog will be necessary. I'm also looking forward to hearing from VA today on its plans for IT upgrades and use of automation to address PACT Act claims. With that said, and in the interest of time, I will stop and say that there are a great many issues we need to dig into today, and many we will not have time to get to. So to VA and to our veterans, I say that as the author of the PACT Act and current chairman of this committee, and ranking member next year, I will continue to ensure this bill is implemented successfully and that every single veteran who is eligible receives their due benefits. I will guard intensively against any attempts to water the bill down or diminish its effectiveness. It is the promise we made to our veterans and the least we can do for those who have done so much for us. Ranking Member Bost, you are recognized for any opening remarks you may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everyone. Thank you all. I want to say thank you to our witnesses for being here to discuss VA's progress towards implementing the PACT Act. You know, DOD estimates that 3.5 million veterans have been exposed to dangerous toxins over the past 20 years. Thousands of veterans have reportedly become sick as a result of that exposure. Unfortunately, the VA has been slow to providing them with earned health care and benefits. You know, I'm proud that Congress worked in a bipartisan, bicameral manner to finally pass the PACT Act. However, signing the bill into law was only the first step. Now we have to make sure that VA implements the bill correctly. When we debate the PACT Act earlier this year, I raised the concerns about VA's ability to roll out the PACT without severely disrupting services for veterans. Following changes to the bill that provided VA with the resources to address operational impacts, Secretary McDonnell assured us that he could execute it without crippling existing operations. I intend to hold the Secretary to his word. Our veterans have waited too long for the VA to fall short now. Today, I want to discuss how VA plans to address the backlog of claims. Although I'm glad the bill invests in modernization in the claims process, I'm worried that the VA is already behind the curve. VA projects that it will take until February of 2025 to work down the backlog. To do so, VA is relying on an aggressive hiring effort and mandatory overtime. Unfortunately, you know, many of these new hires won't be able to put a dent in the backlog until they're fully trained. Furthermore, mandatory overtime is costly and can lead to employee burnout. Finally, simply put, this is not a long-term, sustainable, long-term solution. You know, I'm also worried about that we are less than a month away from VA's go-live date of the PACT Act claims, and the VA still hasn't published a training letter for existing employees. That said, I appreciate the VA has been piloting some of the new technology to process the claims. While the department may call this automation, my staff has seen firsthand that it is not automation, but rather an early set of tools that are intended to eliminate minimal tasks. In fact, employees at the Boise Region office reported that while they appreciate the potential, they need to be further developed to become truly useful and save time. VA is just scratching the surface. Claims processors deserve the most advanced software used in the financial industries to make their jobs easier and increase their productivity. Now, I would like to also focus on how VA plans to reduce wait times for care. As of September 30th, 2022, there were approximately 8.9 million veterans enrolled in the VA healthcare system, and 7.3 million are getting care. VA estimates that the PACT Act could expand healthcare eligibility to an additional 5 million veterans. VA continues to be challenged by their appointment referrals and scheduling processes. As the toxic exposure screening is rolled out across the system, I would like to know how the VA intends to act on identifying and treating what could be a growing number of health conditions. And I'm eager to hear how VA plans to use its new hiring authorities to recruit and hire talent. I also would like to know what has already been done with these authorities and the statutes on any pending hiring timelines. Finally, I want to remind everyone how important it is that we resolve the scoring problem created by the cost of War Toxic Exposure Fund. As I have mentioned before, if action is not taken, the committee will use up its offsets and be unable to advance a wide range of legislation next Congress. I offer I've offered a solution, and I will welcome anyone with a constructive proposal. We cannot delay fixing this fund. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. I now call up and recognize our witness panel for today. First, we have Dr. Sharif El-Nahal, Undersecretary for Health of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Mr. Joshua Jacobs, Senior Advisor for Policy, performing the delegable duties of the Undersecretary for Benefits, Department of Veterans Affairs. Mr. El-Nahal, Dr. El-Nahal and Mr. Jacobs are accompanied by Mr. Guy T. Kiyokawa, Assistant Secretary for Enterprise Integration from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Mr. John W. Burstler, Chief Veterans Experience Officer from the Department of Veterans Affairs, and Dr. Michael Brummage, Deputy Chief Consultant, Health Outcomes Military Exposures, Veterans Health Administration, Department of Veterans Affairs, Mr. Robert T. Reynolds, Deputy Undersecretary for Disability Assistance, Veterans Benefits Administration, Department of Veterans Affairs, and Ms. Tracy Thierrett, Chief Human Capital Officer, Department of Veterans Affairs. Thank all of you for being here today, and I will remind our witnesses to pause 2 to 3 seconds before speaking and answering questions. Dr. El-Nahal, you are recognized for 5 minutes to present your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Bost, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss VA's implementation of the PACT Act. I'm joined by my VA colleagues whom you just introduced. The PACT Act marks the most significant expansion of veteran care and benefits in decades, empowering VA to do more for veterans exposed to toxins during their service. The law allows many more veterans to benefit from VA, and it affords us the tools we need to execute. I am proud of the incredible work VA has already done, and we are ready and eager to implement the full extent of this law. In VA, we have one guiding question: are veterans at the center of everything that we do? We are not orienting ourselves around what would be best for VA, but rather what would be best for veterans. Today, I want to share VA's three-pronged approach to PACT Act implementation. First, we must reach and inform every veteran who may qualify for these historic benefits. Second, we must build our capacity to better serve current veterans and those whom we welcome into our system. And third, we must build the path into the future to include groundbreaking new research on toxic exposures. On outreach to veterans who could benefit from the PACT Act, we are working every day to ensure that there is no wrong door for veterans to access VA care. Our Veterans Experience Office has mapped the veteran engagement journey across all possible touchpoints with veterans. Whether a veteran or survivor comes to VA through a medical center, a benefits office, our website, or any other way, we are ensuring that veterans receive information about these new benefits. As soon as the Senate sent the bill to the President's desk, we launched va.gov/PACT, a one-stop shop website for understanding the PACT Act and applying for benefits. We also enhanced 1-800-MY-VA-411, an easy-to-remember telephonic front door for veterans and their supporters with 24/7 live agents. We are reaching out to veterans directly through their communities and local VA medical centers. During the week of December 10th, next week, we will host events at over 80 sites across the country to do targeted outreach, including claims clinics, healthcare enrollment, and toxic exposure screenings. We're also reaching out to over 300,000 participants in our burn pit registry through our email, regular mail, and social media. We have implemented a nationwide effort to screen veterans who already get care from us to determine potential toxic exposures. As of December 5th, we have screened over 500,000 veterans, with over 37% reporting exposures. As of November 8th, this is a routine part of care in every medical center in the country, and it allows us to refer veterans directly to VBA as they may qualify for enhanced benefits or an increase in their priority group. On building VA's capacity to deliver PACT Act benefits and care, we must hire enough employees to execute this law. I want to thank this committee for the PACT Act's broad range of flexibilities around hiring and retaining staff. To date, VA has implemented 4 sections of Title IX, resulting in several new tools to help us with recruitment and retention. We are on track to complete policy changes around all hiring provisions by the end of the calendar year. Hiring faster and more competitively by consistently implementing these new authorities across the country is my top priority. We recently held a national onboarding surge event to fast-track candidates' onboarding experiences by coordinating all required pre-employment actions into a series of events at facilities across the country. I'm proud to share that we completed all the onboarding steps for more than 12,800 new employees, nearly doubling our events goal. We're also making a historic investment in hiring additional healthcare enrollment specialists. And as of October 25th, more than 3,600 of these specialists have been trained to determine PACT Act eligibility. We also need to build VA's brick-and-mortar infrastructure into the future, and the PACT Act also allows us to do that. The law immediately authorized 31 new leases, which will expand access through new sites of care. We're thankful for the more efficient leasing process as well and appreciate our ongoing partnerships with GSA, OMB, and this committee to get these leases done expeditiously. I'm also particularly heartened by the new ways that we can work with our academic affiliates and DoD to meet the healthcare needs of veterans. Co-location with our partners just makes sense for veterans who receive care in our system. And on what comes next for veterans, families, caregivers, and survivors, VA has a strong tradition of research that has improved veteran lives. We will lead efforts to create an interagency toxic exposure research working group to develop a 5-year strategic plan. This research is critical to investigating whether toxic exposures may lead to other conditions that are not yet considered presumptive. This law empowers us to serve veterans as well as they have served our country, and we invested and are prepared to do so. We will stop at nothing to get this implementation right, and we will not rest until every eligible veteran and survivor gets the care and benefits that they have earned. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Ellenhall, Dr. Ellenhall. And without objection, your written testimony will be your written testimony in full will be included in the hearing record. Mr. Jacobs, you're recognized for 5 minutes to present your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Boston, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting us to discuss VA's implementation of the PACT Act. As you know, VA has struggled for decades to address the health effects of harmful environmental exposures that occurred during military service. Historically, the process for VA to establish a new disability as a presumptive condition has been too long and too complex, taking precious time that ill veterans simply don't have. Now, the passage of the PACT Act allows us to begin to right these historic injustices and deliver benefits to millions of potentially eligible veterans, some of whom have been waiting for decades. The PACT Act is not only adding over 20 new presumptive conditions related to toxic exposures and new locations for exposure to Agent Orange and radiation, but it's also strengthening how we hire and train new personnel, deploy new technology, and establish new presumptive conditions in the future. Given the serious nature of toxic exposures, we made all conditions outlined in this new law presumptive the day the bill was signed, rather than phasing them in over years as the law anticipated. For veterans who file for a PACT Act-related claim before August 10th, 2023, the one-year anniversary of the bill signing, their claim and benefit will be retroactive to the date of signing. I want to take the next few minutes to explain the three-pronged approach that VBA is undertaking to deliver on the promise of the PACT Act. First, we are focused on hiring efforts up and down the organization. VBA has been preparing for PACT Act implementation since last year, hiring approximately 2,000 additional employees. In the next few months, thanks to the Toxic Exposure Fund, we anticipate adding almost 1,900 more employees to our roles. In addition to hiring the right people, we're also focused on training them. All claims processors, whether new or current employees, will have the training necessary to process claims under the PACT Act. Second, we're looking at all of our policies and processes to enable more efficient benefits delivery. To expedite VA's ability to begin processing PACT Act claims by January 1st, VA is drafting sub-regulatory guidance, which will be followed by formal regulations to implement the PACT Act. We anticipate the sub-regulatory guidance will be published in the Federal Register this month in December. VA is also actively engaged with all contract medical examination vendors to ensure they are prepared to handle the increased volume of PACT Act-related examinations. Third, VA is using automation as a decision support tool to expedite claims by determining eligibility, auto-ordering exams when necessary, and gathering all relevant data and information to give our claims processors the ability to make quality claims decisions quickly. In fact, these tools have already reduced decision timeliness from several months to several days for the small number of claims that have leveraged this technology at one of our 8 pilot sites. But the best implementation plan in the world doesn't matter if veterans, families, and survivors don't know about the law or how to submit a claim. We're conducting an aggressive outreach and communication plan to spread the word about the PACT Act in as many ways as possible: traditional media, online, community, and veteran group engagement, to name a few. We're bringing the PACT Act to veterans regardless of where they are. This includes targeted outreach to traditionally underserved veteran groups: women, Native Americans, African American, and Hispanic veterans. The PACT Act helps meet generations of unmet demand from veterans and survivors, and we are already seeing this demand. The day after the bill was signed into law, veterans set an all-time record for benefits claims filed online. Since then, veterans have filed nearly 177,000 PACT Act-specific claims. While we are receiving more claims than ever before, VA is also delivering more benefits more quickly and more accurately to more veterans than ever before, and we're processing claims at the fastest rate in VA history. I was at the VA 10 years ago when the backlog was at its peak, and I'm happy to say that today we're in a better position to tackle these challenges. Between then and now, there's been significant investment to move from a paper-based system where the floors were literally buckling under the weight of all the paper we stored to a paperless claims process, and that investment is paying dividends. In FY22, we processed 1.7 million veteran claims, shattering the previous year's record by 12%, and we've gotten the claims backlog down to the lowest in years. Now, as more veterans and survivors apply for their PACT Act benefits, we do expect an increase to the inventory and the backlog in the short term. But the efficiencies I just described and the 3-part implementation plan we are executing have established a solid foundation as we work to deliver on this historic law to provide benefits to millions more of our nation's veterans. This concludes my statement, and we would be happy to answer any and all questions you or other members of the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Without objection, your written testimony in full will be included in the hearing record. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. And so I want to begin with a question about the Toxic Exposure Fund. As has been mentioned, the Toxic Exposure Fund has presented challenges with CBO scoring. I've committed to working with the ranking member and the Budget and Appropriations Committee in the House and Senate to come up with a solution to this scoring issue. However, the Toxic Exposure Fund, created in the PACT Act and passed into law with bicameral and bipartisan support, protects funding for health care and benefits. The key word there is protects. This means that veterans who need this health care and these expanded benefits don't have to be concerned that a change in Congress or a change in administration will impact the care and assistance they receive. Now, veterans should not have to return to Congress each year, hat in hand, begging this body to grant them benefits that they have earned. So my first question to Dr. Elna Hall and Mr. Jacobs is, do you believe the Toxic Exposure Fund will improve health care and benefits delivery across VA?
Mr. Chairman, I completely agree with the importance that you are placing on getting the Toxic Exposure Fund right. This is funding that has to be dedicated and implemented on behalf of veterans benefiting from this legislation. We are working on that methodology with OMB and with this committee to make sure that our methodology reflects the right path. And so that work is ongoing. And I absolutely do think the funding will bolster our ability to be able to implement this legislation.
Well, Dr. Allen, could you get more specific? How does the Toxic Exposure Fund assist you and VA with long-term planning for the care of toxic exposed veterans?
So we in VHA are making use of the funding right now for outreach efforts and to fund our initial research efforts. I'll happy to pass to Mr. Jacobs, who's front-loading a lot of that funding to hire claims processors.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The funding that we've been provided in the Toxic Exposure Fund is critical for our ability to get off the ground. We are actively using the funding to hire additional claims processors and other staff that are critical for our ability to meet the increased demand for new benefits. We're also using it for investments in scanning, so we're working to proactively scan additional military records so we don't have to wait for a veteran to file the claim, but when we have the record there and can leverage the automated decision support technology. And we're using it for other investments that without this funding, we would be unable to do so. And so in the absence of this funding or additional resources, we would likely see the backlog increase further than projected.
So what I hear both of you saying, Dr. Elnall and Mr. Jacobs, without the assurance of funding year to year for the PACT Act implementation, it would be very difficult to plan and execute the legislation as it was passed. Is that what I'm hearing?
I would very much agree, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree. I would also add that when we're making these requests, we are going to make these requests transparently, and we'll submit the request for appropriate congressional review and consideration.
Well, thank you. Now, what would removal of the fund meaning TEF, mean for VA's ability to update its aging IT infrastructure or implement IT projects like greater automation?
Yeah, I would be very worried if we didn't have the additional funds. You know, we've built a solid foundation as we've moved from a paper-bound process to a paperless process, but VBMS needs to be modernized, and we're working to build on that foundation with the work that Mr. Reynolds is leading through the automated decision support. And I think that's also why the PACT Act required a 5-year IT modernization plan, so that we can take a strategic look at how to skate to the puck, right, where we need to figure out how do we leverage the most up-to-date technology and apply it appropriately within our system. And let me turn to Mr. Reynolds to provide some more details.
Thank you, sir. And I was going to echo that really the 701B modernization plan and the PACT Act is really our tool that we're leveraging to lay out that path forward for our automation and other IT capability systems that are going to help us deliver benefits quicker and faster with more quality to our nation's veterans.
Well, thank you. My next question is going to take some setting up of context, so I'm going to just refrain from going over time. We've got a lot. I'm so pleased we have so many members from both sides of the aisle here today interested in this subject of PACT Act implementation. It's so critical. And so I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to recognize the ranking member for his questions. We'll probably have more than one round.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that because we do have a lot of questions as well. You know, Mr. Jacobs, VA is, you know, relying on mandatory overtime to address the claims, and in my opening statement, you heard me express the concerns I have with that. Will the automation be able to significantly speed up the claims process, and by how much?
Thank you very much for that question, Congressman Bost. Right now, we see a lot of potential for the automated decision support, and I think you're right to note that it's not automation, it is automation decision support. So it's helping our claims processors be more efficient. It's enabling them to extract key information in the veterans' files and summarize it in a succinct way to help accelerate the decision and create an audit trail for potential down-the-line review. I would say that what we have seen in the limited number of cases that have leveraged this technology is that they have accelerated the timeline significantly. However, we're still quite early in the process. We started at 4 regional offices that have been piloted, and we've recently expanded to 8. We're working to verify, validate, and graduate. So what we're doing is we're working with our frontline staff to make sure.
You got anything on my drive?
Oh, I think.
Dr. Rees, your microphone is not on mute.
It is now again.
Okay.
Okay.
So, thank you. So we're working to verify, validate, and graduate to make sure that our efforts to implement this more broadly are informed by frontline staff feedback, because we want to ensure if we're going to invest in this technology that our staff is going to use it, that we have confidence that it's going to produce the right outcomes, and that our staff have confidence as well.
We're just real hopeful that you're picking the right system, and
Yeah.
with, not that we have any trouble anyplace else with systems.
I'm mindful of the history of previous IT projects, sir. What I would say is, as we've worked through our projections and looked at the inventory and backlog, we are under leveraging the lift from automation decision support right now. We want to under promise and over deliver. I think ultimately down the road, this has the potential to really be a game changer.
Do you know a date of when you're, or some time that you could give us of when you're going to have the automation in line?
Let me turn it to Mr. Reynolds to speak in more detail. He's been leading this effort and can get into those details.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yeah, so our automation that we have right now, specific to the PACT Act, we have all 54 diagnostic codes for the 26 PACT Act conditions ready to go for claims for increase and presumptives. And then on Monday, we will release for supplemental claim types. So in less than a year, we started, as Mr. Jacobs mentioned, just for a claim for increase for hypertension. And we have since expanded to 54 diagnostic codes for all the PACT Act conditions. And we are ready when the sub-regulatory guidance is released for us to start processing by January 1, they will go through the system.
Okay, and then training behind that?
Well, actually, training is already initiated for that, sir.
Thank you. I'm going to go to my second question if I can. Dr. Andahal, per your testimony, over 350,000 veterans have been screened by toxic exposure. During the pilot for screening, 39% of veterans screened expressed concerns about exposure. All positive responses required a primary care follow-up within 14 days. Do you have the data on how quickly these veterans are being screened?
So, Mr. Ranking Member, we are happy to get you the very specifics and up-to-date information about the Stage 2 of toxic exposure screening results for the record, the clinical reminder that follows a positive confirmation from a veteran that they're concerned about a possible exposure during their service. What I will say is that we are working across the system to go from end to end in that screening process to include that clinical reminder that would be useful for a primary care physician if they have the expertise to be able to address clinical conditions and signs of conditions that result from an expression of an exposure, but also, if needed, we have environmental health care specialists throughout the country to whom that veteran can be referred if their case is complex. And so
that would answer the second part of my question, which is those that don't have a primary care physician. How are you working with them?
That's right. So we are capturing a large majority of veterans with our primary care clinic implementation of this. We're still in phase 1 of the toxic exposure screenings. However, as you mentioned, veterans interface with our system through specialists and through non-clinical care environments as well. And so we have 3 stages of training and implementing this. The second will be on specialty clinicians. And the third phase will be any VA employee, including administrative staff, to be able to at least do that first step of the toxic exposure screenings to then hand off to a clinician for the following.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired, and I'll wait till the next round to go further.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. Chairwoman Brownlee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I wanted to add my support to your opening comments and statements with regards to the Toxic Exposure Fund and to you, Mr. Secretary, as well. So it's extremely important, a very important component to this overall bill. I will say, however, with the CBO scoring, it is an issue that, as the chairman said, needs to be resolved. And I'll give you one example with regards to one of my bills, and that's the Elizabeth Dole caregiver bill. And it is scored at billions of dollars now because of the way CBO looks at this with regards to the TEF fund. So it's a problem because I'll give you 2 facts that I know you agree with regards to in-home care, and that is 1, it's less expensive than institutionalized care, and 2, the health outcomes are better than institutionalized care. So now we're suddenly in a place where we are limiting the VA to continue. We're saying to the VA, in essence, continue on with more expensive programs that are going to offer our veterans less better health outcomes, and that's a problem. We've got to move forward, and the VSOs, veterans, really support this bill overwhelmingly. There's bipartisan support both in the House and the Senate, yet we can't move forward because of the scoring. And while we want to, the PACT Act is so important. We also don't want to stop from moving forward on other important health options, particularly health options that are going to, at the end of the day, save money for the VA that they can reinvest to better improve other health outcomes for veterans across the enterprise. So I just wanted to make that statement, not asking a question, but just to say that it is imperative that we move forward in finding a solution on this. So I guess my first question to you, Dr. Elnahal, first let me say it's nice to see you again. Thank you for coming to my district and participating in a great celebration of opening a new health clinic there. It was a great day. So thank you for being there and participating. With regards to women's health, and one of the presumptive illnesses is reproductive cancers, so that's very broad. It is the most obvious category to include in these diseases that are more commonly affected by women, such as breast cancer and ovarian cancer. So but my question is, what are the considerations that the department is taking to ensure that some of these obvious, unique prevalences of diseases experienced by women veterans is incorporated into these presumptive diseases? And generally, I'm very interested in, how the VA is really going to interpret really not only reproductive cancers, but all of the presumptive illnesses here that are broad, getting down to sort of the specifics of it all. So if you could address that, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think the event that we attended together was really meaningful moment, especially for a legacy for women veterans. I will say that this is an extremely important topic that we are focusing on diligently. Our Health Outcomes and Military Exposure Office is working in concert with VBA and other elements of VHA to really define in a granular way what conditions fall under these categories, to include cervical, uterine, breast cancer for women. And we are trying to be as inclusive as possible, consistent with science and evidence. I'll ask if Mr. Jacobs has comments, and then Dr. Brumage if we have time.
Yep. Thank you very much, Dr. Elnahal. So we have been working in partnership with our clinical experts and our research experts to define the full cohort of particular diseases, and we will be publishing that list as part of our sub-regulatory guidance this month. It'll be part of the Federal Register, and so we'll have an opportunity to explain what is included there, and then we will also be actively looking, as we look forward, to explore other conditions that may not be included to try to identify new evidence where we can make the case to establish additional presumptive service connections. And so I will tell you that our general philosophy has been to be as expansive as possible within the requirements provided to us in the law.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Chairwoman Brownlee. Representative General Bergman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the interest of time, this will be rapid-fire questions. If you can give a specific answer or yes or no, I'd appreciate that. And then just consider, if you would, if these unoccupied chairs in this committee room were being occupied by veterans who were waiting in line for you to get your work done. So, Mr. Jacobs, VBA has done some restructuring in the past 18 months, now a few new deputy undersecretaries and whatever. As it pertains to the PACT implementation, who's in charge and who's accountable? Give me a name.
I am accountable for all VBA-related implementation.
Okay, so you got the dot. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Reynolds, how long have you been in charge of the Office on Automated Benefits Delivery?
1 year, sir.
Okay. How much money have you spent to date with various contractors to support your efforts?
About 60 million, sir.
Okay. How is the money being distributed across vendors, or how many vendors are supporting the automation efforts?
So we're leveraging probably 4 vendors or so that are all working in concert together based on their specialty of what they bring to it. And some are existing, such as our scanning vendors. We're leveraging.
Is 4 vendors enough?
No, sir, but that's part of our strategy going forward.
So
for the
when,
modernization.
okay, so is there a timeline to increase that number of vendors?
This year, sir, we will be
Well,
increasing.
this year has roughly 20-some days left.
This fiscal year, sir, we will be putting more contracts out on the street for more IT capabilities.
Just remember, I mean, we're giving you money.
Yes, sir.
You control the time, and once time is gone, the time is gone. Mr. Jacobs, you testified on the 16th that 7,000 claims had been processed using the automated process. So you tell me, is 7,000 out of roughly 3 million claims considered a success after 2.5 years and $30+ million? Yes or no?
I would say it's still early. We don't
Yes
want-
or no?
I would say it is.
Are you feeling good about what you've accomplished in that time?
I'm feeling confident that we will execute
Yeah,
this
well,
well.
that's a long yes or no, but the point is.
Yes, sir.
The point is, there is, and now I'm going back 6 years, joining this committee in 2017, sense of urgency.
Yes, sir.
The men and women who we are seeking to serve through the money we appropriated to you all to get the job done, they had a sense of urgency in their lives. And we just still need to continue to work on that. Now, I heard someone mention earlier that the VA is leasing some new buildings. Why wouldn't VA lease people? In other words, contractors. Don't hire full-time equivalents. You got a lump of claims. I know this is kind of beginning to sound redundant here, but why wouldn't the VA get the number of contractors on board to do this, coordinate it, and bring down the backlog, the surge, as we would call it? What's holding up that effort?
Congressman, I would say all options are on the table. We do utilize contractors as part of our effort. Mr. Reynolds spoke about contracting. We have them in other efforts, and we're exploring other.
But is there a sense of urgency? Can you move
Yep.
the ball faster here? Because the
Yep.
clock ticks.
Sir, I wake up every morning thinking about what I can do to help the veterans, families, caregivers.
Do you
and
go to bed at
survivors.
night looking back at the results or the
I do-
setbacks?
I do, and I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it
That's
as well.
good.
I am fully consumed by the responsibility and the privilege that I have been given to uniquely be able to effectuate this unique law.
Don't be afraid to let this committee know where you've run into roadblocks, because we're here to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So let me ask you, and I'm just going to make it my final question, and you don't have to answer. This is not required, but it's more of a thought question. Are any of you willing to bet the ranch, or in other terms, gamble with veterans' lives and health on the transition to technology? And I'll just leave that for a future time. I yield back.
Thank you, General Bergman. Representative Lamb, you recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Jacobs, I'm coming back to you on a different issue that I've been made aware of by my constituents. It involves rating veteran service representatives who do not get production credit for claims that they feel are not ready to rate or advance but have to be deferred. And I guess nationally, one of the graphic examples of this is there was a decision made to defer certain Camp Lejeune water cases from before the PACT Act until after PACT Act implementation, because the veterans will be treated better in the post-PACT Act framework. But as a result, all the work that was put in on those claims up till then does not go for production credit for these employees of yours. And it's becoming an issue with people meeting their quotas and that sort of thing. So I guess first I would just ask, what is the logic behind not awarding some sort of partial credit for people who make the decision that is supposed to be best for the veteran?
Thank you very much, excuse me, for that question. You know, I've been traveling to regional offices, and while I do that, I meet with employees and I meet with union leadership. And every single regional office I visit, I hear about our production standards and the requirements and how we incentivize or disincentivize our employees to do the work. We ask a lot of our employees. This is complex business. They have to know all of the body systems. They have to know the etiology of conditions, the link to military service, how to understand, how to evaluate military records, and then make the nexus and the connection here. So what I will tell you is I'm digging into this. We're working to update and revise our production standards right now. I don't have a satisfactory answer as I've gone through this. I think there's a tension between giving partial credit and completing the claim for the veteran, and between what's best for the employee and best for the veteran who's receiving the claim. And so we're trying to make sure that those align, and then ultimately that as we work through the production standards, we don't create unintentional consequences that lead to outcomes we don't support. So what I would like to do, sir, is I'd like to take this for the record and follow up with you in more detail, if I may.
Sure. So I think I just want to confirm that it doesn't appear right now that you have a defense of this policy or that you can articulate the logic behind it. Am I right about that? I mean, because I don't understand. I agree with you that there is a tension between the two goals that you outlined, but I don't really see how in this specific example where you have raters that actually made the best decision for a veteran to their own detriment with these Camp Lejeune cases, that doesn't strike me as a policy that is serving anyone, really. So as long as it is under reconsideration, it sounds like what you're saying, that it is being actively reconsidered?
We're looking at all of our production standards right now. I'm telling you, as someone who's still relatively new and trying to learn the organization and the details, I don't personally have an answer that I've found to be acceptable. That doesn't mean that there isn't a logic there. I don't know enough to be able to tell you now, and I'd like to take it for the record to understand the historical logic as we work through the current effort to update the standards.
Right. No, I appreciate that, and I thank you for at least acknowledging that there is no obvious logic to a policy like that. And I think as you all are in the process of trying to get more of these employees and have them perform even more work in the post-PACT Act world, these are just the kind of things that have to be remedied. So I appreciate very much your interest in it, and we'll be looking forward to the explanation when it's ready. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Moore, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jacobs, many of the veterans in my district are having some serious trouble getting timely care from the VA. Now, the VA has been helpful in our mobile office hours, and I appreciate your effort there, but when does the VBA have a full and sufficient staffing needed? Do we have a plan for that to work through the backlog, and what's your alternative plan if you cannot meet your hiring target?
Thanks very much, Congressman. First, I would say if you're running into challenges with constituents not getting timely decisions, please reach out to our office so that we can help try to address those issues. We are actively hiring. I mentioned in my opening statement we hired about 2,000 additional staff last year, anticipating the increased workload associated with military environmental exposures. We have a goal using the Toxic Exposure Fund in the first 6 months to hire another 1,900, and we're about a third of the way there. And then we're working to hire another 2,500. All of those staff, in addition to being hired, have to be trained. And so we have aligned our hiring timeline to ensure that we can fill them with the training seats. And so we are limited in terms of the number of staff we can hire based on the number of spots we have in our training classes. So we can max out at about 4,400 net new employees per year. We're working to expand the capacity for training. And what we're doing as we work through the workload is identifying areas where we can provide partial ratings. So in the event we have a claim that has, for example, 10 conditions, if we have enough evidence to make a decision on 3 of those, we want to execute that. So we can put money in the veteran's pocket right now while we work to continue the evaluation, the evidence, the additional steps that may be necessary for the remaining 7 conditions.
In your statement, you mentioned the VBA plans to deliver a claims processor training system by December of 2022. Given that we're already 1 week into December, when does the VBA plan to actually release the PACT Act training? And when do y'all plan to release it? And when will it be published?
We started training on Monday, so we're working with the standard operating procedures. We have some computer modules that are on what we call our talent management system, and we're working to create what is called a train the trainer model, where we have our experts in the compensation service office who are training a handful of staff in each of our 56 regional offices so that they can work to help supplement the training, answer questions, deal with any issues that may arise following the training, in addition to having a centralized repository, a SharePoint site to collect frequently asked questions and follow it up. And what we're doing following the training is we are working to evaluate the effectiveness. So we're doing both, individual interviews with claims processors, but also evaluating with follow-on reviews of the claims to ensure that the training is effectuated as designed.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Levin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to begin by saying what a huge deal the PACT Act is. I think it's really an example of what we can accomplish here in Congress when we work together. And I want to commend all my colleagues who voted in support of the PACT Act, and particularly you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership in making sure that this got across the finish line. Just as important in getting the bill passed and signed into law is now the implementation, and I'm grateful for the work you're doing and the work you will be doing in the years ahead to make sure that this is a resounding success and that this legislation is enacted with our intent in mind. Towards that end, I have been following closely. I am very grateful for all your hard work. I am a bit concerned to hear from our VSOs that they haven't seen a lot of communication around the one-year open enrollment period for VA healthcare. Dr. Elnahal, I'll begin with you. I was really pleased to see VA is hosting a nationwide PACT Act Week of Action starting on Saturday to have awareness spread about the PACT Act to help veterans. But what is VA doing to help spread the word about these events?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Congressman. It's extremely important, as you mentioned, for us to get the word out effectively about this. And so that feedback, if there are more specifics to us on veteran populations we're not reaching, please let me know and let us know as soon as possible, and we will respond with dispatch on that. We are going through multiple avenues to make folks aware of this, starting, as you mentioned, with the PACT Act Week of Action. Next week, we're hosting over 90 events across the country, exceeding the legislative requirement because we think we have to do that. And we will have healthcare eligibility enrollment specialists at these events to, in real time, bring veterans in directly into healthcare should they qualify, especially the veterans who separated from service between 2001 and 2013, who have this critical one-year window to be able to do so. We're also making use of as many other avenues for communication as possible around this topic specifically, and I'd like to ask Mr. Borsler to supplement with the many things that his office is doing.
Thank you, Dr. Elnahal, and thank you, Congressman, for the question. At the 95-plus sites that we're going to be hosting these town hall events across the country, as Dr. Elnahal mentioned, we're also going to be doing screenings and connecting them directly with claims experts to help them file their benefits claims should they screen positive, be part of that 39% that we've already seen in the 500,000 that we've screened so far. But really making sure that we're reaching out to that, unenrolled population or the untethered population that, hasn't interacted with VA before, and making sure that we're getting out on radio and TV advertisements, especially for rural veterans, and making sure that we're out on radio as often as we can. We're doing a lot of outreach in 12 different languages. We're making sure and engaging our community veteran engagement boards. We're asking a lot of your constituent offices and field offices as well for help in promoting that via your newsletters. And
we're ready. Good.
Yes, sir. And we'd love to host more town halls with you all, with all the members.
We'll take you up on that. How about the Solid Start program? Are you using that as a means to communicate?
Yes, sir, absolutely. As you all know, Solid Start is a phenomenal program that proactively reaches out to service members when they're making that sometimes difficult transition from military to civilian life at that 30, 60, 90, 120-day period after they leave service, to make sure that they're enrolling and aware of VA benefits and care.
I want to make sure I get a little bit on our bill in, but before that, my team is listening, so we're going to take you up on that town hall idea, and we look forward to that. Wanted to make sure to mention, last week the House passed my Commitment to Veteran Support and Outreach Act, CVSO Act, and my great hope is that this will help a lot of our CVSOs at the county level, and they're on the front lines every single day. I know they are in San Diego County. I know my friend Matt Rosendale and I have worked on this legislation. My question for you at the time we have is maybe for Mr. Jacobs. Can you discuss the role, the important role that CVSOs play to connect veterans with their benefits, and why this bill would be important?
Congressman, I think county veteran service officers are an absolutely critical part of our infrastructure. They're on the front lines helping veterans understand the benefits process, helping them identify what information they need, how to apply, and what to expect with the process. They're also really important to help us, demystify and perhaps bust myths. We're hearing information from veterans who think they're going to have their claims reduced. We know that less than 1% of claims are reduced on an annual basis, and it's because typically a condition has improved or they've got a TDIU case. And so we want to make sure that we're getting the word out, and county veteran service officers are absolutely critical to it.
I thank you for that. Out of time, but I know my friends in the Senate are watching this, at least I hope they are. We just passed this in the House again. Let's get the Senate to take action. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. Mr. Roy, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank the chairman, and thank all of the witnesses for your time and for being here and for your service. Obviously, there were some disagreements when we were debating the PACT Act. I stated some of my colleagues stated some. And regardless of some of the reservations, and I think they were reasonable reservations, we're all here now trying to figure out how to support implementation and get it done the right way within that framework, notwithstanding potentially maybe some changes in the future. And in September, as you all know, I led a letter with 44 of my colleagues asking for regular briefings. I appreciate that we've been engaging in those briefings. I hope those will continue. This is of the utmost importance, and I appreciate your all's work to fulfill that request. One of my biggest concerns with the PACT Act was as you know, as I stated publicly, the creation of the Toxic Exposure Fund that put billions of dollars on mandatory spending and kind of put it out there on autopilot. And because of that provision that creates or expands a VA program that is paid for by this fund will receive a mandatory score, impacting a half a dozen bills we've already marked up. I support Ranking Member Boss' proposal that would reclassify this as discretionary spending covered by regular appropriations. If this action is not taken, the committee will be unable to responsibly advance legislation next Congress, and our constituents deserve being able to correct that issue, in my opinion. Dr. Elnahal, it's my understanding that as of September 30th, 22, there were approximately 8.9 million veterans enrolled in the VA healthcare. And it's estimated that the PACT Act will expand eligibility for VA healthcare services and benefits to an additional 5 million veterans. Now, I still get a lot of phone calls about questions about access to care. I get a lot of requests, a lot of guys and gals pulling me aside saying that they hit walls, they hit snags, they're unable to get care. I've talked about them in this committee. I've offered meetings with some of the folks that run South Texas VA with some of my constituents who literally run into a multi-week buzzsaw unable to get care. I understand that there are horror stories and there are great stories. That's true in all respects. But, my question is just, what are we going to do now to guarantee access to care when you're now going to have a 55% increase of people potentially able to walk through the door?
Thank you, Congressman, and I frankly share your concern about every morning and every night before I go to bed, as Mr. Jacobs mentioned, on us being able to implement this effectively while continuing to serve the current base of veterans whom we are proud to serve every day, and welcoming as many new vets who qualify for these benefits as possible. We're undertaking a number of efforts to expand healthcare capacity, knowing that we're going to get this demand. because of the legislation. And so one of the most critical ones is actually an effort across the country to be able to do two things: standardize the amount of time that our clinicians and specialists spend by specialty on seeing patients, to make sure that we're maximizing the opportunity to bring more veterans into a daily schedule every day, and to ensure that our clinicians are spending 80% of that booked clinical time seeing veterans. We think there is tremendous opportunity to be able to increase capacity in a direct care system for that. And that will be a staged implementation over the next 6 months, and we will be transparent with you about that progress. But that is specifically in place not only to improve access for our current base of veterans, but of course to prepare for that next cohort coming in from the PACT Act. We're also doing other things to make sure we're relieving our clinicians and making the bandwidth necessary for them to be able to do that. So we're looking hard at the different administrative tasks that they're doing every day, clinical reminders and alerts that may not be necessary in every case for every veteran. These things consume time for veterans. And we are also, of course, maximizing our efforts with our Reboot initiative for burnout to make sure that we're taking care of our clinicians as well. But this is going to be a key effort to expand access, and we're also prepared to make major process improvements in our community care, scheduling, and coordination efforts, because we know that's a very important avenue as well.
And that raises my next question. With 30 seconds, I'll leave you with this one. It's going to require a longer conversation, obviously. 5 minutes is tough. But on community care, what are you doing, and what are the specific plans to be able to utilize community care to deal with this now 55% increase of potential customers, if you will? And what separate hearings, obviously, on Cerner, I guess now Oracle Cerner, on where we're going with, improving technology, which tends to be a massive barrier to the ability to flow in and out with respect to engaging in community care. And not asking you to get into the technical side of that, but at a service level, how are you being able to expand the use of community care given some of those barriers and hiccups? I yield back.
Well, right now, Congressman, I am not satisfied with the time it takes for veterans on average to get a community care appointment scheduled and to be seen in the community. So we're looking at that process end to end to make sure that process becomes more efficient, but also looking at all options on the table to empower veterans to take on some of the steps where we think that our processes are taking too long. So veteran-initiated scheduling, online scheduling, we're trying to maximize those options as much as possible. And as those options become available to veterans, we'll make sure you're aware and this committee is aware to make sure that veterans are taking advantage of that. And we're also, of course, looking at our community care network contracts to expand network adequacy to maximize the options that veterans have.
Thank you, Doctor. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Mr. Pappas, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate our VA witnesses and their discussion about this important issue. I want to commend everyone on the committee, including the chairman, for their persistence in getting the PACT Act through. I know that as I talk to veterans in New Hampshire, they express relief. They express the fact that, well, they know they might still get sick as a result of their service. It's lifted a burden off their shoulders. And so I'm really hopeful that we're going to get this right. In some ways, passing the bill was the easy part. Now the implementation brings the difficult considerations and challenges that need to be overcome. And I appreciate VA's commitment to doing that and the resources that are being brought to bear for our veterans. I want to zero in on one issue, Mr. Jacobs. Maybe you can address this. I've done some work on these for-profit claims consultants that some border on the nefarious and tiptoe around the line of legality. And it's really necessary that we protect our veterans from scammers and bad actors as we see the PACT Act implemented. Veterans are reporting that they're not being advised about easily accessible public-facing VA web pages, aren't being directed towards accredited representatives to assist them with their disability claims. So as we see more veterans looking at their options right now, I'm wondering what VA is doing to proactively communicate the credible resources that are available to veterans to make sure that our veterans know what is out there for them, that they're not paying a premium to get the benefits and care that they deserve.
Thank you, Congressman, for that very important question. I share your concern. I know we all share your concern. We are working to make sure that we do everything possible to protect veterans and their dependents by educating them about fraudulent activity, potential predatory schemes, and the common tactics that are used to take advantage of them and their hard-earned benefits. And so we're working, we've got materials, kind of a fact sheet of sort, kind of a do and don't. We are working with internally through an effort that I'll turn to Mr. Birchler to talk about, what we're calling VSafe. And we're doing everything we can to proactively communicate that veterans should, one, come to VA to file their claim. They can do that by coming to one of our 56 regional offices. They can file it online through va.gov, or they can work with one of our many accredited partners who have been vetted and are going to help for free. And so they can do that with one of the many helpful veteran service officers. We talked about the county veteran service officers. The states have a lot of resources. There are plenty of opportunities for veterans and their family members to work to get the care and benefits that they've earned without paying a premium. And so we've got information. I will share it. We've got a fact sheet that we're working. We would love your help to further distribute that. And we're also making sure that if veterans feel that they've been taken advantage of, that they file a complaint with the Inspector General. They can file a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. We're actively involved in partnering with them as well. And let me turn to Mr. Birchler to talk about some of the other efforts.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Jacobs. And you mentioned a lot of the resources that are available to our veterans and their families currently. But as he mentioned, we have a very broad-based effort, not only internal to VA, called the Veterans Scam and Fraud Evasion Task Force, but with all of our federal partners who can really serve as force multipliers in addition to the organizations that he mentioned. But we have information on what's an accredited organization and what is not an accredited organization, and what resources veterans have to report some of these firms that may be more predatory in their action toward veterans.
Can you address whether this information is part of the PACT Act portal? And as veterans are looking at their options through that particular portal, if they'll also see information on what's credible and what isn't?
Yes, sir, absolutely. And va.gov/PACT is mostly about getting veterans directed into filing a claim or enrolling in veterans health care. But then there are also lots of different resources like va.gov/Camp Lejeune, which directly addresses a lot of the commercials and a lot of the outreach that's going on from unaccredited firms to reach veterans and their families for these types of fraudulent behaviors.
Okay. And I think it's just important that information is as accessible as possible, so it's not siloed in some other part of the website, that veterans, as they're looking at these particular issues, can find it easily.
Yeah, Congressman, we have a list of accredited representatives that's on our website, and we also have handouts. So when a veteran goes to a toxic exposure screening, they should be getting a handout how to file a claim, and there is a QR code that takes them to a link for the list of accredited representatives. But we'll take another look and make sure that the way we've designed it is intuitive and easy to access to ensure that we're doing the best job we can to get the word out.
Thanks. That's critically important. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. Ms. Mace, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Takano and Ranking Member Bost. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your leadership on the PACT Act on this issue, for our men and women in uniform who are literally willing to take a bullet for our country. Our ability to serve them in this capacity via this bill is enormous and will have a tremendous impact on our veterans for the rest of their lives. It was a monumental piece of legislation providing long overdue protections and benefits. I want to thank those who are here today also for how hard you are working to provide for the challenges that our veterans are also facing. We're all trying, our goal is the same at the end of the day, and we're trying to work together and row in the same boat together. My first question this morning is for Mr. Jacobs. The VA intends to use the Toxic Exposure Fund to hire an additional 1,900 employees in fiscal year 2023 to help the influx and process the influx of claims that are going to be due to the PACT Act. And due to the unique nature of life as a service member, there are generations of veterans who found it difficult to transition back into the workforce, as many of you know. In fact, I had a classmate of mine from the Citadel recently up here transitioning out and moving into my district next year, and listening to the challenges that individual faces But they're not alone. There are thousands of veterans that are facing those transition challenges. And while the VA and its partners, y'all are doing a tremendous job to help with that transition. But veteran unemployment is still an issue and something that we're all trying to address. In fact, there are over 220,000 unemployed veterans nationwide. To build on this efforts, I introduced the Warrior Training Advancement Course, WARTAC Improvement Act, with Representative Buddy Carter out of Georgia, to improve the WARTAC program, which trains and hires veterans to become claims processors. So my first question is, what are your plans, if any, to recruit more veterans for some of these positions potentially? I think there's a lot of value and meaning to getting veterans in some of those roles.
Congresswoman, thank you very much for that question, and thanks for your advocacy. I think the WARTAC program is fantastic. It's a great resource for us to find transitioning service members who can be dedicated to the mission and help train them for a career in VBA, for a mission-oriented vocation that is going to help them give back to their fellow service members and veterans. We are actively recruiting veterans. We're also recruiting military spouses, and one of the ways that we're mindful of the transition and the constant relocation that's required, so trying to adjust our virtual requirements to enable military spouses to work as they move with their husband or wife. And we're looking to do that. We've had hiring fairs recently in Fort Campbell that were quite successful, and we're looking to replicate that more broadly. I also think that as we educate a lot of veterans who are using their GI Bill, and that's another opportunity as they're considering the many career options that they have in front of them, to let them know that a VA is a potential option, whether it's coming for benefits world or perhaps in the healthcare world and pursuing other training opportunities. I don't think we can do enough here. We're actually moving in the beginning of the year to do a national hiring event. And so part of that effort, as we're working to ramp up, is going to be focused on transitioning service members.
And is there a quota or a goal percentage for those jobs? What percentage you'd want veterans to hold those positions?
No, but what I would tell you is almost 60% of our workforce are veterans. Many more are military spouses, and all of them are veteran advocates who come to work trying to do the right thing.
All right, my next question, I've got about a minute left, Dr. Elna Hall. The Low Country, South Carolina's first congressional district, we're home to about 1/3 of all the veterans in the state of South Carolina, approximately 70,000 individuals, many of whom use the Ralph H. Johnson VA Medical Center. Unfortunately, due to the rising cost of living in Charleston, South Carolina, retaining the talent and high level of employees that we have there has proved to be very difficult to provide for quality care for our veterans. So how are you going to use the new hiring authorities within the PACT Act or elsewhere to make VA jobs potentially more attractive, more retainable, sustainable for high-quality folks to serve this community?
Thank you, Congresswoman. As I mentioned before, hiring enough employees to implement this legislation and also to better serve the existing veteran cohort we serve today, including in South Carolina, absolutely depends on hiring faster and more competitively. And we are grateful for the new authorities that we have that allow for better recruitment and retention incentives, the ability to give lump sums up front, the ability to make the hiring process itself more efficient. And I'll ask Ms. Therrett to summarize some of those exciting opportunities. I will say that I am holding myself personally accountable for consistent implementation of all of those authorities across all of our networks in VHA. Ms. Therrett?
Thank you, Dr. Elna Hall. I am leading the integrated project team that is implementing Title IX of the PACT Act. We meet on a weekly basis. We are within the fifth wave of 6 waves of completing implementation. The first wave, which we implemented within 30 days of enactment, was removing the restrictions on hiring housekeeping aides. We understand how critical that position is to having our medical centers function effectively. And since doing that, we have seen a 3.2% increase in onboard rates for housekeeping aides. The second effort is to reach that early career talent by using the expedited hiring authorities for college graduates and post-secondary students, VBA, research, research, contracting have been using those authorities and raising the student loan repayment limits. Our social workers, our human resources professionals, our medical support assistants are actively using those tools that we've put in place since the PACT Act was enacted. The third area that we're focusing on is retention. Right now is that time of year when we are recognizing our high performers. And thankfully, you have removed the statutory caps that we had on awards and bonuses, so we can really recognize and retain our amazing employees throughout the nation. And we have also increased our ability to recognize them through special contribution awards up to $25,000. So all of those authorities have been amazing. We are now in the hardest tranche of our implementation of Title IX, which is focusing on things like critical skills incentives, critical pay positions, special salary rates, pay waiver authority, and the 3 Rs that Dr. Elnahal has mentioned. But we are absolutely across the entire department using every authority in Title IX, trying to get the policies, the systems, the procedures, the training out as soon as possible, because we know the desperate need in the field, and we want to meet that need to serve veterans.
Thank you, Ms. Aaron. I'm just going to add 1 second, Mr. Chairman. In Charleston, South Carolina, it's so expensive to live. A 3-bedroom apartment will cost you $5,000 month to month. It's so important that we retain great employees. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Mace. I now recognize Mr. Mervan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, of course, want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for their bipartisan approach to be able to pass the PACT Act and your work in doing the implementation and the emphasizing of how important it is to our veterans. What I want to talk about today, Dr. Elnahal, you had mentioned, are the veterans at the center of what we do is the first question. I want to address talk time, and I'd like an administrative definition of what talk time means. And that question would be for Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Bursler. It has come to my attention that the VBA for the National Call Centers has imposed performance standards called talk time, which measures the amount of time legal administrative specialists are on the phone to answer veterans' questions. While this measure is averaged out, it doesn't make expectations. It doesn't make exceptions for calls that may require special attention, including first notice of death calls, if an older veteran has difficulty communicating, or if a veteran has complex or several questions. If an LAS fails this metrics, which can be as little as 8 minutes and 30 seconds, the LAS can be disciplined, which can potentially lead to their termination. This focus on call time decentivizes LASs from asking follow-up questions to veterans or mentioning other benefits and programs the veteran may be eligible for, and for the fear of the call going too long. My question is, I had a experience with this as a township trustee where the first point of contact is the VA. If we're limiting the amount of time to be able to connect with that veteran, we will create future challenges. And so ultimately what I'm asking is, if the reputation and the outcomes and connecting with the veteran is so vitally important with first point of contact, why are we limiting the amount of time for those individuals to be inducted into world-class health care?
Congressman, thank you very much for that question. I agree that veteran experience is critical. It's why for the first time ever, we're going to start measuring veteran experience as part of the disability compensation process. We actively do it in many of our healthcare domains. We haven't done it for disability compensation. We measure success based on timeliness and quality, but I think veteran experience is equally important. And to your point, it's a determining factor as to whether or not a veteran wants to continue to pursue the benefits he or she may have earned, or to follow up and enroll and pursue VA health care. Because
how do you define talk time administratively?
So the talk time is about 8 minutes, is my understanding. I need to follow up and get you a response for the record into the exceptions. I thought that there were some carve-outs, but I need to go back and make sure I don't misspeak, and so I'd like to follow up. I agree. We need to make sure that the call center agents, who are often the front lines, have the ability to speak with the veteran or family member who's calling seeking information in a manner that addresses their questions or concerns. We also have to manage that with an appropriate balance, learning from industry standards so that we can manage our workload and we don't have too many individuals waiting.
How will you measure veterans' quality of care,
Well, on the healthcare side, there are multiple tools. And
specifically on these calls?
on these calls, I think what we're looking at is we have what is called V signals, and we have
V signals?
V signals. Let me turn to Mr. Bursler to speak to the tools we have at our disposal.
Yes, sir. It's called Veteran Signals. It's our survey platform that actually monitors and asks veterans after they contact the National Contact Center or my 1-800.
What's the participation rate with that?
It's fairly significant. You know, I can get you the specific data points, but it depends on whether that's the National Contact Center or 1-800-MY-VA-411, which is the single front door. And for these types of cases that do take longer to speak with a veteran that has special needs or special accommodations, I would recommend 1-800-MY-VA-411. They push 9. They'll get to the hotline.
Right.
Those individuals, those contact center representatives are specially trained to handle these types of veterans cases, and they can spend as long as they need to and then connect them with the administration or the staff office that can execute. And their average speed to answer is the lowest across the enterprise.
So the point of the question is to emphasize that we do not want to punish individuals who are taking time to care, to ask the proper questions so that veterans who were the first point of contact, who served our nation, aren't being rushed through the process. We have to be aware of the fact that that is a deterrent and not something that attracts people. And when you create obstacles and you speed through those processes, people will be less inclined, and then you'll ruin the reputation of a program that is designed to be able to create quality health care. So what I'm asking you to do is to pay special attention to that. When you do not limit time for individuals to have connectivity to the program that we are implementing for world-class health care, I'm asking you to explore avenues that allow those conversations to continue at a desperate moment while someone's calling in.
Congressman, if it's okay, I'd like to follow up and talk about this with you and your staff in more detail and how we balance the talk time, the time to first response, the dropped call rate, and manage the overall experience, because I think this is a really important issue. I know it's one we're actively hiring for our call center agents. They are incredibly important staff members on our team. They're also often promoted to VSR positions as they seek career growth, and so we constantly have to backfill, and I know that there are multiple elements that influence how we manage this, and I'd like to talk with you a little bit more and make sure that I address your concerns in detail.
And I know I've gone over, but the fact of the matter is if one veteran feels a disconnection, they'll go back to the VSOs, and you'll ruin the reputation of this program, and you'll have less participants. This is something that has to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. Mr. Banks, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jacobs, I appreciate the VA's outreach efforts on implementation of the PACT Act. I'm really looking forward to the town hall and resource fairs in Mishawaka, Indiana at the Jackie Walorski VA Clinic on December 12 and 14, and at the VA's Fort Wayne campus on December 17. I wonder if you could talk for a moment about the continued outreach efforts after the initial wave of town halls, and is there an expiration date on the outreach efforts, or will they continue in perpetuity for as long as the PACT Act is being implemented? What does that look like 3, 5, 10 years down the road?
Yep. Thank you very much for that question. We are working diligently to get the word out. I think there's a sense of urgency, as was mentioned earlier. We've got a 1-year open enrollment period for VA healthcare. We also have a 1-year timeline where if a veteran files their PACT Act claim within 1 year of the bill's enactment, they can preserve the earliest possible effective date. So we're pushing hard. There's always more to do. What we're trying to do is we're using multiple channels of communication, traditional media, PSAs, social media, working with our partners, getting articles published. Our veteran service organizations, the states, the counties are great resources, and then tapping into other affinity groups, faith organizations to get the word out. That has to be sustained, and it's part of our regular effort that's focused on outreach, and it'll continue in the out years. It's something that we can't stop doing, but let me turn it to Mr. Bursler to talk about some of the additional details.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs, and thank you, Congressman. And back to the V Signals, or Veteran Signal Survey platform that we mentioned a minute ago, we're actually asking those veterans who have filed a claim or have been screened what their experience was, how did they find out about the PACT Act benefits and care that they're now eligible for, and what motivated them to file a claim or to seek more health care, so we can learn and adjust over time and get better and more targeted at our outreach, especially for those veterans and their families that currently aren't enrolled or aren't aware of those benefits and care.
Mr. Jacobs, on a different subject, it was in 2013 that the Chinese military carried out one of its biggest cyber attacks against the federal government on VA computers. They seized at a moment when VA claims backlogs peaked at 600,000. So they struck at a moment when they knew that backlogs were high and when we were vulnerable. With the PACT Act, the VA backlog is projected to peak at over 440,000 claims next October in 2023. So again, we should expect that at a heightened backlog that the Chinese military will also take advantage of a moment like that. What are we doing to prepare for it?
Our CIO, Mr. Kurt Del Bene, is actively involved in improving our cybersecurity hygiene. There are multiple efforts underway that he's leading in partnership with our IT teams as well as the VHA IT teams. I'd like to take that for the record to provide an informed response detailing the multiple steps. It's something that we're constantly concerned about, and I want to make sure I don't misspeak or share anything that's not appropriate for a public forum.
Fair enough, but is there an ongoing discussion? Is there a working group, official strategy being prepared for that?
There is both a working group within VA, and I know we're actively involved in interagency discussions that are focused on cybersecurity threats. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Ms. Shirless McCormick, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you, Ms. Shirless McCormick. Then I'll go on to recognize Ms. Locken. Ms. Locken, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. You know, I think you've heard a lot today about how the PACT Act is just a landmark piece of legislation, bipartisan legislation, that's hopefully going to give another 3 to 5 million veterans health care across the country, and will make folks that served in the Gulf War and in the 9/11 generation, and even some of our Vietnam-era folks who were left out of some of the Agent Orange legislation, will give them the opportunity to walk back into their VA and get coverage based on their service. I have never worked on a bill that has had more impromptu thank yous from the public than this bill. From Michigan, when I'm just walking around at the grocery store, to the congressional delegation that a number of us from this committee went on, where we met with our uniformed military in Kuwait, in Iraq, and in Jordan. People come up to us and say, look, I just want to thank you for the PACT Act. So I just want to note the importance of the work, and I think long after many of us are gone from this body, this will be a piece of legislation that we can be really proud of. But what I'm concerned about is what feels a little bit like buyer's remorse on the price tag. And we know that to fund another 3 to 5 million veterans getting health care, to live up to our commitment, it costs money. And we created, Congress created this toxic exposure fund, this TEF of $500 million to start, to put aside and fence off money for our veterans. We all voted on that. It took a few rounds in the House and a few rounds in the Senate to make it bipartisan, but we all voted on that. And while it is not perfect, what I'm concerned about is that there's now a lot of complaints about this fund, and that is cover for wanting to roll back the price tag of the PACT Act, that it's somehow a backdoor way to get rid of it. It makes me very nervous. While I am absolutely open to adjusting that fund, the question comes down to, are we going to keep money fenced off for veterans or not on toxic exposure? That is the fundamental question. I guess I want to ask you, if that money, let's forget about the name of the fund, if there is not a fenced off amount of money put aside to implement this bill, will we be able to provide another 3 to 5 million veterans care based on their toxic exposure of service?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question and the points you made. We would be quite concerned on our ability to fully implement all of these benefits in healthcare if we do not have a toxic exposure fund. The administration strongly supports that, and that money should be accounted for responsibly against our broader responsibility to be good stewards for taxpayer money, but we do need set-aside funds to be able to do this earnestly. I'll also mention that the president very much agrees with your sentiment here, and that's why he's called for in his budget an entirely different and third budget category for veteran health care to ensure that discussions around negotiating on other discretionary pots more generally do not impact the ultimate investments we can make in veteran care. And we strongly support that as well, and I wanted to make mention of that.
Yeah, I want to make the point because while I hear a lot of criticism of the fund, I don't hear a lot of proposed alternatives. And I just want to make sure we're having a blunt conversation that there is no serving of additional veterans from the Gulf War, the 9/11 generation, and those from Vietnam in the way that we all want to serve them without fenced-off money. I'm just making that point. Lastly, I will just say I echo the comments from both sides of the aisle. Marketing and getting the message out. We went back and looked at the social media posts just from the past couple of months from the VA and the various folks. We could be doing a much more aggressive campaign to educate people. We're happy to talk about how to do that. Many of us do that for a living, and we want to get the message out so they don't have to hear about it and call our office and ask. At the same time, though, I just want to make the point that we've all seen the scams that are coming out of the Lejeune lawsuit. It is amazing. Just on my social media feed, Pump to Me is just every single day, come and let me make money off of you for, if you happen to serve in this time. And I didn't even serve there. So can you tell me very briefly what you're doing to prevent fraud when it comes to the PACT Act?
Yeah, thank you very much, Congresswoman. We're actively working to share information, share best practices, so that veterans, their families understand, survivors understand what the process should look like, and they've got a link to resources that are available to them. They also, if they feel like they may have been subject to predatory behavior, they also have resources to file a complaint with the IG, with the FTC, or with us. On Camp Lejeune specifically, we want veterans to know that if they file a claim, that claim will be offset. If they're successful in the court of law, that claim will be offset by the court with whatever amount of funds they get from VA for Camp Lejeune-related benefits.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Locken. I now go to Mr. Rosendale for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've just about run out of questions. Everybody's done a very thorough job today, so I'm glad to be a part of this, and thank you all so much for coming out today. I am not sure who is the best person to answer this, Dr. Allen-Hall, so if you can direct it to which one of your staff there. I want to ask questions specifically about claims, though. To me, Mr. Jacobs, okay, because the implementation of this act is really going to be about having accurate measurement. We hear a lot of anecdotal stories and subjective terms about something that is being handled faster and more effective, but that's not really a good measurement criteria. So I want to get down into the nuts and bolts of it. I'm a firm believer that you have to inspect what you expect, and that is the only way that we can identify if we're doing a good job and how we can do a better job as we move forward. Being said, if you could tell me, Mr. Jacobs, what is the average claims process time that you're dealing with right now?
Thank you very much for that question, and I agree. Data is important. This is a very data-rich organization. I want to pull up the latest statistics so I'm not giving you the wrong information. Right now, we have average days pending is 106 days, and average days to complete is 125. Of course, there are outliers there, so that doesn't tell you the full picture, but there's a host of other information that can complete the broader overview of what we have in the claims inventory.
Okay, and what is your target?
The target, what we've defined, what the department has defined historically as the backlog, is 125 days to complete a claim. And once it's over that time, that is defined as being in the backlog.
Okay, and the other story that we've had and the feedback that we've had is that the criteria has actually changed over time, okay? So that the measurement of when something is opened and when it's closed has changed. So what would your answer be to that? Are you changing your criteria for measurement? Have you? Do you intend to?
Yeah, sir, I'm not familiar with that contention. I've been in this position since the end of July. I'd like to better understand it, and I'd be happy to follow up. I'd be concerned if we're moving the goalpost and then not sharing information about that. I think we need to be transparent about what we're measuring and what that means.
Okay, and so my next question would be about the community care ability as well. So in a large rural state like Montana, there's no way we're going to be able to have facilities in each and every one of these communities. And so what is the specific process, and what does a veteran have to specifically do in order to be eligible to access community care?
So Congressman, it's a really important question. You and this committee defined those criteria in statute under the Mission Act. There are 6 pathways for a veteran to qualify for community care. The access standards are one of them. They're based on drive time. They're based on the time that a veteran waits to get a primary care, specialty care appointment, or other modalities of care. And we have those defined through regulation, but that is a specific criteria outlined in the statute among many others.
So let me ask you something. If a veteran falls within that criteria but doesn't specifically ask for community care, is the Veterans Administration going to advise them that you are eligible? We can't meet this guideline, and assist them to make sure that they can get care as soon as they possibly can at a location as close as possible?
We are required to inform the veteran, make sure they are aware that they qualify for community care as one of many options. So yes, that is part of our process.
Okay. Mr. Jacobs, how long does the VA plan to keep claims processors on mandatory overtime, and for how much does VA project that that's going to cost?
Yeah. Right now, this is a very people-centric operating model. So the production that we get in terms of claims produced heavily depends on the existing employees we have, the new employees we're hiring and training, and overtime. Right now, we've got it through the fiscal year. We realize it is not a sustainable model. We're looking to take a break in the 4 weeks between the end of December and beginning of January to give staff an opportunity to enjoy the holidays, enjoy the time with family, and come back refreshed for what will be a very, very busy year as we work to implement the additional PACT Act claims. What we're doing to supplement that is we're working to try to streamline the process. So we're trying to proactively tackle unnecessary steps like overdevelopment so that we can reduce the workload. We're also trying to leverage the technology modernization, the automation decision support as we work to scale that up to enable the staff to work more efficiently. I agree with you. It is not a sustainable model. Right now, it's what we have because the only thing worse than doing overtime is making veterans wait.
Right. Thank you so much. Mr. Chair, I see my time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. Mr. Sablan, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman Takano, and thank you for holding this hearing. Dr. Elenal, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, sir. We just implement, there was really, for me in my district, there was a lot of response to the passing of the PACT Act and the signing it into law. We're encouraging our veterans that if they think they have an issue, they should go to this va.gov/PACT and start a process. But in my district, I don't have a VA doctor. I have a doctor contract for service, and let me ask, are doctors required that if they diagnose some kind of diagnose relative to those allowed in the PACT Act, are they required to pass that on, to send that patient to somewhere where they could get better access or get services, treatment? Please remember that Mr. Rosendale of Montana has issues with his district because it's so wide apart. Please keep in mind that we're 8,000 miles from my district. So just that question, are they required?
So, Congressman, we take it as our primary responsibility to inform veterans from every demographic, every region in the country and throughout our territories that this option, these new benefits are available to them. That responsibility falls on us at VA. I will say that the outreach efforts are specifically targeted to folks who we think may qualify. If you think there are gaps in our ability to reach veterans that you represent across the vast territory that you represent, landmass, an area rather, please let us know. We do try to fill gaps in care capacity in any way we can, and one of those ways is contracted physicians and providers. We are trying as much as possible to hire more physicians in our roles at VA because we feel that those physicians are best equipped to meet veteran needs. And that's why one of our top legislative priorities is, of course, to relieve us of the statutory cap on salaries, especially for specialty physicians, for whom we are really struggling to compete in the market. And the fact is, we pay sometimes over $1 million per physician for contracted doctors when we can exceed the $400,000 cap at a much lower total number if we're able to employ them. I do want to ask Mr. Borstar to talk about specific outreach efforts relevant to the veterans you represent.
Thank you, Dr. Elnahal. We have started a program called the Veterans Experience Action Centers, especially effective in rural areas where it's hard to access VA facilities and care. And what these are essentially like 3-day enrollment sprints where veterans will and their families have an opportunity to sign up ahead of time for appointments during that 3-day period. And then our system actually calls them and helps them file a claim, helps them enroll in VA healthcare, and helps answer any other questions that they may have so that they have a world-class experience. And so it's directly tied to outcomes. There are many other opportunities to do this elsewhere. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. I actually, my question was, are doctors required to inform the veterans that they should get additional help? And I'm glad that Dr. Elnahal said yes. But just no disrespect. I just, the way it was said was that, veterans across the country and the territories are in the country. They're not outside of definition of country. We are a part of the United States of America. So we're not the country and the territories. We are the country. We're in there. And I don't have a CBOC in my district. I'm still working on that. It's going to take some time, but again, the veterans looked at this act as something promising for them, those who may have difficulties, and I believe that they have a right to think that, and I believe the act, the PACT Act, does address those issues. And now my final question is: what happens if veterans were to come register, hundreds of thousands, millions of, and find out that there's no enough money in the TEF to address their issues? Anybody?
Well, what I'll say to that, sir, is that is why we are advocating very, very hard to make sure that the Toxic Exposure Fund is funded adequately to be able to meet the execution needs of this legislation. I will say that for VA healthcare out of VHA, we do benefit, thanks to you and this committee and Congress writ large, from an advanced appropriation that insulates us from some of these other budget debates so that we can continue and not disrupt veteran healthcare. That said, we view the Toxic Exposures Fund as absolutely critical, and I thank you for highlighting it.
Thank you, Doctor, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Sablan. And I call on Dr. Miller-Meeks for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think as
beneficial as the PACT Act will be, and with as much anticipation as was expected and difficult it was to pass, perhaps implementing it will be much more difficult than getting to this point. Having said that, as both a physician and a veteran, and have provided care within the community for veterans, I'm extremely concerned about some of the comments I've heard today, especially related to care in the community. So currently, regardless of what healthcare system one is in, whether it is federal or private or nonprofit, there is a shortage of physicians. There is a shortage, massive shortage of physicians, nurses, practitioners at all levels. So you've mentioned this in some ways, Dr. Elmenhall, about trying to remove hiring caps and wage caps. However, my concern is that when I talk to physicians within the community, and just had this experience last month, they find many obstacles and barriers and a dismissiveness to them in providing care to veterans. And I think, and even the comments I heard today were disparaging of those who provide care with. And so having provided care to veterans in our community under the Mission Act, I think what I'm asking you is, what's your perception and what message are you giving to those physicians who provide care in communities? Because quite honestly, there are not enough physicians or nurses to provide care within the VA system. You can't ramp up, you can't do loan repayment, you can't bring them in fast enough to service what is currently potentially 5 million veterans, and as said earlier, an increase of 55%.
So thank you for the question, Congresswoman. It was not my intention at all to undercut the importance of community care physicians. The fact is, a third of our workload and more than 25% of our outpatient appointments are provided by these essential physicians, which is why we have a robust community care network. I really view this year as an opportunity to make that network even more robust and add more providers to that list of folks seeing veterans. And so, writ large, these are really important providers for us.
Thank you for that, and please make sure that all throughout, at all levels of the VA system, that is understood, and that these are valuable members providing care to our veterans. I also have concerns about how we will do this in an electronic way, also to gather the data and information to go from a presumption of toxic exposure causing a disease to actually have the scientific knowledge and wherewithal and research base that disease was actually caused. That's one of the things we'll do when we haven't been able to adequately implement and institute our electronic healthcare system. So we're implementing the PACT Act when we're still years and millions and billions of dollars down the road of instituting our electronic healthcare system. So how are you integrating both of those things at the same time?
It's a really apt question, Congresswoman, and one of my first trips after taking this position was to one of our sites using the Cerner system. And a shared decision between me, the program leaders of the EHR initiative, the deputy secretary, was that at current state, the system is simply not working as intended for the clinicians using it. And that's not excusable, which is why we extended the secretary's initially announced pause in July to be able to only redeploy at the very earliest next June. And we have been working feverishly. This is not a pause of work. This is a pause that allows us to do even more work to make that system better alongside Oracle Cerner, reconfigure it so that it's intuitive for our clinicians, and that is our intent. We should see
perhaps
this works.
my time's running out, so I apologize. So perhaps in bonuses we're giving for good work, maybe we need to have people share in the risk when work is not implemented in the way that it should be implemented. And then I just want to comment on Representative Sablan. When people are outside of CONUS, they're not outside of the United States, I think was his point. And we know that we have veterans in all 50 states and overseas. And I have many veterans who have complained to me about applying for VA benefits in the electronic system. It is not well designed, it is hard to navigate, and these are people who are not foreign to the internet. And so, Mr. Jacobs, what's the VA's plan to reach veterans who are overseas and make this process of applying electronically easier for veterans?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. We have worked to redesign our online application effort on va.gov. We also partner, I know, with the embassies overseas to help connect information. If you have specific concerns or complaints that you're hearing from your constituents, I'd like to follow up and better understand that to make sure that the current efforts we have in place are actually meeting the concerns that you're hearing about. And so I'd love to follow up if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Miller-Meeks. I now recognize Ms. Capter for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bost. I'm informed for this hearing of the, I don't know if you can see this, the hands of a constituent veteran that I represent who was in the Iraq conflict. I have visited many veterans. I have never seen hands like this. This particular veteran suffers from internal injuries as well and had toxic burn pit exposure, but his hands are the way they are because of picking up hot ordnance that was exploded. I think of him a lot. The fact that he's even working is amazing. He does virtual work. And one of my questions is, number one, can you clarify in some written form to me how many jobs you will be hiring for? Because I want to get an application to him. And then secondly, your schedule. You mentioned 53 locations. I pulled up the locations you're coming to in my region, and really there's nothing for the region that I represent in Northwest Ohio. So I'll have to do it myself using material you have. I'm sure other members will be in the same position as I am. So could you please help us prepare adequate materials to present to veterans across our region? One of the questions I have, and I'll spill out the questions and then you can answer them in the time remaining. Number one, for a veteran like I just showed you, his injuries, if he's already under VA care because he has internal damage as well, and he comes to report to his doctor or caregiver at the VA, will they say, oh, you might qualify for this under the PACT Act? Or does he have to go to the website and try to find everything himself? So when current patients come in, will they be urged to go by the personnel? Are they trained to refer them to toxic care? Number two, for the jobs you mentioned, how many will there be? I think you said 1,900. How many of those will be virtual jobs that some of our vets might be able to apply for, or others? I would appreciate, again, you rattled off a number of phone numbers and so forth. But if we are to try to inform across our region, can you give us the most essential materials to use in our presentations? Finally, in my district, as others have mentioned, our airwaves are inundated by predatory law firms urging vets to file lawsuits and so forth. How can the VA prepare to respond and implement regulations on false advertising or restrictions on the profit percentage these organizations can take from these veterans? Literally, they are eating up the airwaves. Congresswoman Slotkin mentioned, I think, Camp Lejeune. Same is true across Northwestern Ohio. So I am looking for your advice and leadership there. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Congresswoman. In a moment, I'll pass the Camp Lejeune question and the claim process hiring question you had to Mr. Jacobs. In general, we have to hire 52,000 people a year in our healthcare system, not only to meet the demand that we expect to increase with our current base, but of course, all of the veterans who will be added to our roles who will benefit from the PACT Act. And that's why we've declared out of our healthcare system hiring faster and more competitively as our first priority. In terms of the outreach events for the PACT Act Week of Action, we will look for opportunities to do an event. This is not a one-off outreach effort next week. It's the beginning of a long road of significant outreach, and that's our commitment to you, to work with you for even more effective outreach. Regarding your question about physicians and whether they are talking about the PACT Act to veterans, that underlies our toxic exposure screening effort across all of our primary care clinics. whereby every single enrolled veteran, according to the statute, is required to be screened. We've already done over 500,000 of those screenings. And of course, we have environmental specialists and environmental health specialists and toxic exposure screening navigators to answer even more questions should veterans have them. Mr. Jacobs?
Thank you, Dr. Elnahal. In addition to what he just mentioned, when a veteran screens positive on with a toxic exposure screening, they get the material, but we are also going to be in a position to proactively send letters to the veterans who've screened positive, informing them that they may be eligible for PACT Act benefits. So we'll be following up on that letter or the information that we're sharing with the veteran to try to provide that proactive communication. We are.
May I interrupt and just, if you have a sample of that, could you provide us with that information?
Sure, happy to follow up on that. With respect to your question on virtual jobs, the majority of our jobs still have a requirement for in-person work. And so we're working through that. We have created virtual positions for our call center agents as well as the MST centralized processing. And so I'd be happy to follow up. We're always looking for hardworking, talented, mission-oriented people. So I'd love to, we need to hire up. We've talked about the 1,900 we're hiring in the first 6 months. We've got many more we're going to need to hire. So I would love to get the information for your constituent. We're always looking for new people. And with respect to your question about the predatory actors, we're continuing to try to get the word out about what veterans should know, what they should look out for. We have a fact sheet that we'd be happy to share with you, helping to inform veterans what to know about how to be vigilant for scams. We've worked with our accredited representatives, the veteran service organizations, the county veteran service officers, the states. There's also a plethora of good lawyers that are doing the right thing, and so want to make sure that people know when they need to pursue legal support through an appeal, that they know how to choose the right support from multiple different options. And then importantly, if anyone you're hearing from thinks they may have been a victim of a scam, that they know that they can contact the Inspector General, they can contact the Federal Trade Commission, they can contact us, and we'll help work to address that. And we'll get that information to your office.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Mr. Elzey, excuse me, thank you, Ms. Capter. Mr. Elzey, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. Mr. Jacobs, I'm going to switch gears just real quick and ask you some quick fire questions. Thank you all for being here. What's been the primary feedback y'all have received on the automated decision support technology pilot sites?
I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Reynolds, who's been running that effort, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Thank you, Congressman. So we've used a human-centered design approach where our claims processors are integral into the process. We've worked closely with our VSOs and our labor partners. So as we've continued to evolve and build this to meet their requirements necessary, the feedback has been positive because we've had them involved throughout the process.
Okay. And how long before they hit all the regional sites?
So part of the process is we have 8 prototype sites right now.
Okay.
And then we are doing a verify, validate, graduate. That's part of the quality to make sure we're getting it. The verify is our logic is correct, coming back from automation. We're validating through our quality aspect. And then we have an independent IV&V contractor that's helping us to graduate. And once we graduate, that we know those claims are good, they'll be processed at every RO. So not just those prototypes.
Okay.
And if I could just add anecdotally, we held our senior leadership symposium in Houston in September, and we had all of our senior leaders, the regional office directors, the business line directors, and we had some congressional staff, we had the Inspector General, we had VSOs, and we had our union partners there. And the feedback I got, particularly from our union partner, who is a very experienced VBA employee, was quite positive in terms of the potential here. We're also receiving feedback on areas where we can make improvements that are more intuitive to the end user, and so we're going to continue to validate and make those changes.
So this is going to save you all a lot of time and employee needs for hiring purposes, right? I mean,
I think ultimately it is going to save us time. We're early. We need to validate and make sure that we're confident in it. But I think what we're seeing is from the overall projected demand that we're going to continue to need to hire people to meet the growth, and then we can work to leverage the tool so that it maintains the inherently human decision-making capabilities while making the process much more efficient.
Good. Okay. That's a fantastic answer. I think everywhere we look in the country these days, it doesn't matter who you are, you're looking for talent from ages 18 to 40 in all different aspects. So I think this question might be for Ms. Therrett. How deep or shallow is our talent pool for what you all need for the next 2 to 3 years of hiring?
So we are taking a multi-pronged effort to do exactly what you just said, reaching those individuals who are in school through STEM programs and other areas where we need the talent for the future. We also are partnering in January with the Student Veterans Association at their national conference in Florida to reach that entry-level kind of early career talent as well. And we are also looking at our retirees and annuitants who may want to come back and help us with this effort that we have undertaken, which, as everybody had said, would be an incredibly challenging effort. That will actually save time in terms of training individuals who are already familiar with the VA environment and have done this work before. So I would say, starting in school, reaching those folks who are looking and wondering what are my career options and wanting them to choose VA and come to the VA and serve and be part of the VA family. Tapping also into, as already been mentioned today, our veteran transitioning service members as well as our military spouses, hitting every installation, partnering with the DoD, partnering with the Department of Health and Human Services, where we can share talent and we can give talent new experiences and opportunities. Because sometimes that's the best way to combat burnout as well, to give people new experiences, new opportunities, to do things that they maybe never thought they could do in their career. And I know VA has a million opportunities that give individuals that opportunity.
It sure does, and the military spouse angle is highly transferable. They're always going to need new ways of supporting their family, especially in times of high inflation. For whether they're veterans or active duty, the empathetic aspect of being a military spouse is perfectly suited to this, no matter which region you're going to. So I appreciate y'all's time today. Thank you very much for being here. I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Elzy, I just want to punctuate your last point. We just got back from a CODEL, as you know, and your point about military spouses and this particular role they can fulfill, I think, is particularly apt. And also, if we can build on SkillsBridge, very particular ways to use SkillsBridge to capture these transitioning service members. But this military spouses, if any of this can be done remotely, some of this work, I mean, I think this is a really good fit, and these are people who really would be committed to the mission. So thank you for that, Mr. Elzy. I now want to recognize Dr. Ruiz. Dr. Ruiz, who was a big push, big partner in getting this PACT Act done. Dr. Ruiz.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm so appreciative of your leadership to get this done for the millions of veterans and their families who've been suffering the injustices of being delayed casualties of war to a self-inflicted wound caused by these burn pits on our veterans. So I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's hearing to ensure the smooth implementation of the historic Honoring Our PACT Act. As you know, I've been fighting for this coverage for years, so proper implementation is very, very important for me and one of my highest priorities. It is imperative that we get this right. With 3.5 million veterans set to benefit from the Honoring Our PACT Act, today's update from the VA on the actions they have taken to date since its passage is crucial. It is essential to understand what has been working and where there may be room for improvement. Since the PACT Act has passed, I'm concerned that when I speak to constituents in my district, some of them still don't know about the PACT Act and how it can help them. That is why I echo the Iraq, Afghanistan, and Veterans of America's call to focus on education and outreach. Back in September, in an effort to help spread the word, I held a PACT Act information session, a Veterans University per se, with Secretary McDonough in my district. At this event, we received a number of questions about the Act and how it could help veterans. Since then, I have continued to hold these events both on Zoom and in person at VFWs and American Legions across my district. My constituents have found them to be incredibly helpful to understand more about the benefits included in the bill and how to access them. While the VA's PACT Act Week of Action is a great step to addressing this, in California, only major cities are going to be part of the activities. This is a missed opportunity to engage communities outside of major metro areas where many veterans reside. The VA needs to consider how to reach those communities, and I echo the Iraqi Afghanistani Veterans of America's call that all outreach options need to be part of the solution and put on the table. From holding more local events to mailing printed materials directly to veterans to offering a virtual option to have in-person events. Dr. Elnahal, what is the VA's plan to reach veterans outside of major cities or in rural underserved areas who have limited access to telecommunications?
The first thing I'll say, Congressman, is I very much agree with you that next week's PACT Act Week of Action, which now has over 90 events scheduled across the country, is only the first step on outreach for this. In fact, we've already been doing a lot of outreach, and this is a major milestone in doing in-person engagements across the country. But your point about rural vets is extremely important. And in fact, we have been trying to target media modalities that rural veterans access more, like radio, to be able to make sure that we reach them. But there's a whole host of other things in our rural health veteran outreach strategy. And I want to ask Mr. Borsler to comment on that further.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elnahal. And yes, Congressman, as we mentioned, we're not only getting out into those rural areas, we're publishing a lot of this information and collateral in different languages. We're trying to reach veterans' families in different modalities. Where we, like many federal agencies, we instituted the Rural Desk Officer position last year, which is connected into this broader network to use and leverage our other federal partners like USDA, for example, to be active force multipliers, in addition to the state departments of Veterans Affairs, the county veteran service officers who are literally in those same rural communities that many of our veterans are. So we hope to reach more and more as we continue to learn based on the survey feedback we get.
Thank you. I'd be remiss if I did not mention that while the PACT Act is critical in addressing the consequences of burn pits use, we also need to address the root of the problem and end the use of these burn pits once and for all. Dr. Elnahal, as the VA and the DoD collect more data on veterans suffering from toxic exposure, do they plan to collaborate on how to use this data to find alternatives to burn pits? And if so, what has been the effort?
I think it's an excellent question, Congressman. We will reach out to our colleagues in DoD to see if there's thinking about that. I will say that the research that we are doing involves inherently DoD and other agencies to research whether there are other exposures that should be presumptive, should we find a scientific connection between those exposures and outcomes. So we'll try to get you a response to that specific question for the record. But Dr. Brumage, if you have more to add on that, feel free.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Elnahal. Congressman Ruiz, we meet on a monthly basis with our DoD counterparts through the Deployment Health Working Group, where we talk specifically about alternatives to burn pits, and we're working together closely with them, sharing information about the health outcomes of these veterans who are affected so that we can find other alternatives.
Thank you. I'll follow up with you. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Ruiz. Mr. Gallego, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of the concerns I've heard from some of my friends that I served with is that in the process of going to get evaluated for toxic exposure, that there may be also a reevaluation of any existing disability rating that they have. And they're not just pulling this out of thin air. Some of them have had this experience in other instances, not obviously related to toxic exposure, but this is something that they're very, very worried about, especially if it drops them below certain thresholds, 50%, 75%, because it triggers other benefits or lack of benefits. Do we have any type of process or implementation to make sure that that doesn't happen? Because if it does, I think you're going to see a lot of people probably just try not to get the reevaluation. I think would be horrible in the long run.
Congressman, thank you for that question, and we are hearing that same concern anecdotally. It is incredibly rare that a veteran would have their claim reduced. It does happen on occasion. So I think 99% or so of veterans have their claim either maintained or increased.
Right.
In instances where it is reduced, it's because a particular condition has improved, and we've had to routinely schedule a reexamination. So in the instance of cancer, maybe it's gone into remission, maybe a knee replacement surgery has improved, or if you have TDIU. In those cases where we propose a reduction in the rating, there is due process, so there's an opportunity for a veteran to pursue redress if they don't agree with that. But what we want veterans to know, it is incredibly rare. And two, we're not going out of our way to look for additional work. I mentioned earlier, nearly 60% of our workforce are veterans, many more military families, and all of our workforce are veteran advocates. They're coming here to try to get veterans benefits. They're not looking for ways to take them away.
Okay, and so, but there's no possibility of us sending out some kind of at least guidance to our staff out, the VA staff out there for that.
Yeah, so we actually were just talking either earlier this week or last week with the National County Veteran Service Officers and the state departments of Veterans Affairs to try to get the word out, because even amongst some of our county veteran service officers, they're hearing that as well. And so we've got I think a one-pager that we're trying to get out to broadly disseminate and try to counteract the myth that has been perpetuated there.
Excellent. I'm very happy to see about the veterans town halls. I think that's very good. I've been spreading that to all my friends. If it's possible, just to add also Tucson in Arizona. Just, Arizona is a big state, but Tucson to Phoenix is a long drive and a lot of traffic, and it just people aren't necessarily going to get back and forth to that. And then last questions for Mr. Jacobs. What are you doing to protect toxic exposed veterans from scams related to applying for their benefits under the PACT Act? And is there any information you'd like to share with the veteran community right now, such as how they can protect themselves, or what to look for when someone is trying to scam them?
Thank you very much, Congressman, for that question. We are concerned about predatory actors that view this monumental law as an opportunity for them to defraud veterans of their hard-earned benefits. We have a one-pager that lays out do's and don'ts about how to avoid PACT Act scams, which we'd like to share with you. I also want to note, we have been working with our partners to try to proactively communicate kind of good hygiene. We're encouraging veterans to apply for benefits through VA, online or in person, to work with one of our many accredited representatives who we have verified are going to help for free. Some of them are in this room. And we also want veterans to know that if they feel like they've been defrauded, they can file a complaint with the IG, with the Federal Trade Commission, or they can come to us for help.
I would just advocate also, I mean, I'm sure it's already happening, but working with the VSOs to get a lot of this information. A lot of my friends will probably first stop will be at the American Legion or the VFW and talk to somebody they trust there, and then go to the VA to file claims, so that you're making sure that they're caught up on everything and every possible scam. I think it'd also be really important. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You'll bet.
Thank you, Mr. Gallego. First round,
so second round to you.
Okay, so we've now concluded the first round, and I'll start off the second round. I'll recognize myself. In November, committee staff were invited to a briefing at VA Central Office to discuss the implementation of the PACT Act. They were especially keen to understand how many veterans VA had enrolled under the PACT Act's enhanced eligibility window for combat veterans, which extended from 5 to 10 years, the period of automatic eligibility for VA health care. Unfortunately, VA has yet to provide this number to the committee. So, Dr. Ellen Hall, how many veterans have been successfully enrolled under this specific authority? And during a previous temporary expansion of this authority, only 403 veterans took advantage of it. I just want to ensure that VA does a better job of outreach this time.
On that question, Mr. Chairman, we are working to update our healthcare eligibility system very diligently. In fact, consistent with the requirements as such under the PACT Act. And once we do, we will have much more clarity on specific claims linked directly to the PACT Act as confirmed by that system. However, we are looking at year-on-year differences in healthcare eligibility applications confirming enrollment. And right now we have about 12,000 more successful enrollments than we did last year above baseline. And so I do think folks are taking advantage of this one-year window, but we are not content by any means. We have to do even more outreach to make sure that the total denominator of folks who may be eligible for that one-year window hear about it. So I'll ask Mr. Borsler to talk about some of those very specific outreach efforts, but we are very keen on maximizing the number of veterans who fall under this.
Thank you, Dr. Elnahal. And Mr. Chairman, we're actually shortening the enrollment process for those veterans rated 50% or higher, which makes it a lot easier in getting enrolled in VHA care, especially if they start, for example, with a 20% rating and then some of the presumptive conditions that they apply for get them over that 50%. It'll make it much easier and faster for them to enroll in healthcare. And we're trying to get that information out, as Dr. Elnahal referred to through all of our channels and all of our outlets, so it hits not only the Vietnam era veterans, the Gulf War veterans, post 9/11 veterans, but their families as well.
Well, thank you. The PACT Act also provided VA several critical authorities related to improving infrastructure, including joint leasing authority between VA and DOD. I'm especially keen on this new authority. Dr. Elnahal, can you or one of your colleagues here today speak to how VA intends to use this authority?
Thanks very much for the question, Mr. Chairman. I think it's extremely important for us to think as expansively as possible about how to use this authority to augment the already hundreds of sharing agreements we have with DOD, which not only veterans depend on in many cases, but our active duty service members. And so we're starting with that list of existing shared agreements where our facilities are co-located, exploring opportunities for further leasing as we look at the market. This is an exciting new authority, and we really want to take as much advantage of it as possible. That denominator of current facilities in DOD and VA who are currently sharing patients actively is a good place to start, but we're going to be thinking as wide as possible about even more opportunities to do so.
So are you saying to me that you've already begun to work with DOD? You've already started to work with them to identify possible opportunities for joint leasing space? Has that already started to happen?
We're actively working with them through the Healthcare Eligibility Committee, the Joint Executive Committee. We just reviewed our current state with our sharing agreements and thinking expansively about how this leasing authority can feed into that. We've already had meetings with the Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs, the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness. That meeting was just a number of days ago to discuss this very topic.
Yeah, well, I'll say there is urgency in my own district with March Air Reserve Base. There are several hundred active duty personnel that have to drive long distances because of their TRICARE does not allow them to use the community providers, and so they have to go to a military facility. I can tell you that if we were able to create a joint facility near that base or on the perimeter of that base so that the numerous veterans in that area could use that facility as well as the active duty, and I can think that this would be I think a very, very attractive solution, and I think these sort of opportunities exist nationwide, and so I know you're aware of them. So, but I'll stress that that we need to get a queue going. So, if I could, I'm going to just take a little more, and I think the ranking member and I are the only members left. This question relates to the new process for determining presumptives for the panel. Title II requires that the Secretary devise a new process for determining whether to establish a presumption of service connection based on toxic exposure including the establishment of a working group to advise and make annual recommendations regarding toxic exposure during military service. The Secretary must also establish a process to conduct a formal evaluation with respect to each recommendation made by the working group. So my question is, what progress has the Department made in establishing a formal evaluation process and establishing the working group?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. Well, what I would start by saying is when Secretary McDonough took over, he placed a strong emphasis on focusing on environmental exposures and worked to establish new presumptive service connections using his authority under law. And so we established presumptive service connection for asthma, rhinitis, and sinusitis, as well as for 9 rare respiratory cancers. And that was done using the foundation of which we will build on under the authority provided in this law, where we're working with the clinical and research experts that Dr. Brumage helps to lead, along with our VBA experts and our interagency partners to leverage the evidence and the new research that we've identified, leveraging the data we have and are continuing to collect, and then continuing to push the boundaries of what we can do within the requirements and the authorities under law. So that work is actively underway. I'll turn it to Dr. Brumage in a moment to speak in more detail, but what I will also say is we're going to, as required under law, publish a list of the conditions that we're actively reviewing. That will be included in the Federal Register so that the public will have an opportunity to understand what we're looking at, why we made those decisions, and have an opportunity to provide feedback, because while we think we know a lot, we know that there's plenty of other information we may not have considered, and we want to ensure that it's transparent and inclusive. Dr. Brumage?
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Mr. Chairman, the new presumptions process that we have developed includes a broad variety of not only VHA health data, but a review of the scientific literature, as well as looking at VBA claims data. And that was one of the ways that we were able to help recommend to the Secretary to recommend asthma, rhinitis, and sinusitis on the basis of the National Academy's report a couple of years ago. The new presumptions process has been reviewed by both VBA as well as our own office, and we've also asked the Office of Science, Technology, Policy to review that as well, and we will also ask the National Academies to review that. So we hope to have a robust process. There are committees already within VA, as Mr. Jacobs alluded to. The Secretary is very interested in toxic exposures, and we will continue to refine this process as we receive more ideas about which conditions we are going to review.
Well, thank you for that. And could either of you tell me how will the views of VSOs and other stakeholders be heard regarding the evaluation of presumptions of service connection?
Yes, and so Mr. Jacobs also alluded to the fact that this will go into the Federal Register, which will help disseminate which conditions we're going to be evaluating next, which will give a period of public review, and we also plan to vet those through our VSO contacts.
I'll just add a note of personal thanks. So as we have been working through this process, many of our VSO partners have wide and deep levels of institutional knowledge. So they've been able to reference particular research studies. They've been able to talk through the historical developments. And so as we're considering various research, as we're talking with our interagency and academic partners, they're able to ensure we supplement and include appropriate materials.
All right. Well, I trust that final regulations will be coming soon on this process. Ranking Member Boss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I ask my next question, I think I need to clear some things up because there were some questions that came out. And understand when we have these hearings, you know, veterans are listening, and I think there's some fear out there of certain members asking certain questions the way they did and making statements the way they did, that someone is wanting to reduce the amount of money that we are providing for toxic exposure. Let me be very, 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 can I say very again? Clear. No one, including myself, wants to reduce those funds. It's not buyer's remorse. This is a problem we saw in the bill originally. And whenever it is said that we are because of the way the language is, we are counting services that we are already providing against a toxic exposure fund is not what any of us want, because there are reasons we have other things we still need to do that now, because of CBO's statements, are costing us in the long run, so that we cannot have the offsets necessary to do other things we need to do for our veterans. So I want the veterans who are listening very, very clearly to understand no one wants to cut or has changed their mind on passing of this bill that's vitally important. That being said, I'm going to my first question. Dr. Alderhaller, CBO submitted a statement to explain how the Toxic Exposure Fund is creating mandatory cost for so many bills. They wrote that VA might not be able to separate the cost related to toxic exposures from the costs that are not related to toxic exposures. Is that accurate? And are you unable to fully separate those costs?
Well, what I can say, Mr. Ranking Member, is that we are working our hardest in concert with OMB and with this committee to make sure that a methodology is in place to be able to do so to the extent possible. These are healthy debates, in my view, Congressman. I know that we all have the same intention to make sure that this opportunity is available and ultimately funded and delivered to veterans across the country. We will have those discussions and debates transparently. And I will make sure that we consult our budget experts for the record, as well as OMB, to get you more information, should that be helpful to you as we develop that methodology.
Good. I appreciate that, because I hope that clears up with our veterans that no one is wanting to change their mind on this. But we are wanting to make sure that we use accurate records to show what we are actually paying, not only for making sure the veterans are provided the service, but so that the taxpayers can know. Also then, Doctor, the hiring authority provides in the PACT Act should allow the VA to build capacity of care. To date, what impact have you seen as a result of these authorities, and is there any standard for how these authorities are being executed across the system?
Congressman, the effort that we undertook recently to have a onboarding surge event across the country in every single network was extremely important for the challenge that you just mentioned. Consistent implementation, surfacing the unique bottlenecks in every corner of the country to hiring, and then, of course, making sure that every single one of our operational leaders know that consistent implementation and full implementation of all of these hiring authorities should be on the top of their list of priorities. And we were able to complete all the onboarding steps for over 12,000 employees. We hope that the vast majority of them end up selecting and moving into our roles. That will help us in a step function way. And we're already seeing some evidence that our new hiring authorities are having benefit. We were able to make use of the recruitment and retention incentive. We are already seeing some benefits in the hiring of environmental service workers, our housekeeping aides, as Ms. Therrett mentioned, and I'll ask Ms. Therrett to complete some of those thoughts.
Ranking Member Boss, two things that I can offer in respect to your question. One is we do have oversight and governance in place for use of these authorities. We are tracking them through dashboards, monitoring the effectiveness, reporting out to the Secretary on a regular basis. Two, as Dr. Elnahal mentioned, ensure consistent and accurate use across the department. The other thing I want to highlight is we're baselining to last year, where we were last year. Within the Veterans Health Administration, there was zero growth within the workforce in October of last year. The accessions and the separations were about even. This year, and I do hope it is in part to the Title IX authorities that we're using, in October we saw over 1,800 gains in the Veterans Health Administration. That is the type of growth that we need to see consistently throughout the rest of the year to meet the demands that are in the PACT Act.
Good to know. All right. Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I will yield back, but I do want to do a closing statement whenever we're ready.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Bost. This completes. Mr. Saban. Mr. Saban, do you wish to be recognized?
No, I'm just listening in, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, this completes the questioning of this panel. And I want to thank our VA witnesses for appearing today. And we'll now move, we're not going to do a second panel, but I now recognize Ranking Member Boss for any closing remarks that he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'd like to once again thank everybody for the witnesses for being here today, and I remain concerned at the VA's ability to implement the PACT Act without inflating the backlog and extending wait times. There's no room for failure here. Toxic exposure veterans and their families have been through enough. VA must get this right the first time. Good care and services depend on it. And I promise the committee will continue to hold VA feet to the fire in order to ensure that our veterans receive the earned benefits. Now, it hasn't made it official that I would be chairman, but I hope that it will be in a short period of time, and I want to make that commitment. But I also want to have, I want to continue to debunk the myth that seems to be circulating. No one is proposing to repeal the Toxic Exposure Fund. Let me say it again. No one, not me or anyone else on the Republican side of the aisle, and I know not on the Democrat side of the aisle. So what we are talking about is whether health care that was already being provided before the PACT Act should be pulled into the fund. I think that it was a mistake, and it created a mandatory scoring problem, and I appreciate the opportunity to correct it for the record. Now, I also want to also appreciate the discussion about protecting veterans from bad actors, because yesterday I dropped a bill that would prevent Camp Lejeune veterans from being charged high legal fees connected with their CLJA lawsuit. And I hope all members support that bill. And with that, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Bost. And as we close this committee's first and last PACT Act oversight hearing for the 117th Congress, I have some parting thoughts. And one of my proudest moments as chairman of this esteemed committee has been partnering with my colleagues to pass one of the most consequential pieces of veterans legislation of the 21st century in a bipartisan manner. And I thank my colleague, the ranking member, for being part of that bipartisan effort. Passage of this bill could not have been possible without the support of my House and Senate peers on both sides of the aisle. Today, the VA panel provided this committee with a wealth of information about what it will entail to properly implement the PACT Act. Moreover, we received some straightforward truths from our VA partners, and the statements from our VSO stakeholders have provided further information about what it will take to be successful in this endeavor. But let's be honest, it won't be easy, but the only way to execute the PACT Act is in its final version. I will freely admit I'm concerned. As my time as chairman reaches its term, I'm fearful that we will lose the momentum that has carried us to this point. I fully comprehend that wars can be costly. Not only are they costly to initiate, execute, and support, they are costly to end. And once over, it is costly to remediate, and repair the harm done to those who were voluntary participants. The main reason I was adamant that this legislation pass is because I heard time and time again from sick and dying veterans who were paying the ultimate price for their service. It is time for America and Congress to pay for the cost of wars, pay for the cost of our wars. However, the ranking member and others in his party, through their actions, and I don't want to go over, the tone was a wonderful tone today, and so I don't want to overstate this. But the solutions they've offered to the unintended consequences of the TEF, the Toxic Exposure Fund, would in effect put us back to an old status quo of where we would have to put the expenses of the toxic exposed veterans in competition through the discretionary funding process with non-discretionary programs as well as VA programs. That is not a solution, and that would in effect make our pact with our veterans under the PACT Act would make it empty. It is my role of ranking member in the next Congress, it will be my duty to ensure that the incoming majority does not utilize the Toxic Exposure Fund as a scapegoat to not pass essential veteran-centric legislation. And I do want to work with the ranking member to make sure that we find a solution to the rigid way that the Congressional Budget Office is now scoring bills to take anything that tangentially relates to toxic exposure and therefore jack up the price of that bill in the way that Ms. Brownlee, Julie Brownlee, has mentioned about her bill. Now, I refuse to fall into the trap of becoming a do-nothing Congress, which is the term Harry Truman coined in 1948 when he was unable to pass critical legislation due to Congress being controlled by the opposing party. In 2017, the New York Times hailed the Congressional Veterans Affairs Committee as models for true bicameral work. Rather than relitigating the cost of the PACT Act next session, let us commit to enforcing our oversight authority to ensure that VA is implementing the Act in the way it was intended and by adhering to the final version passed, which ultimately had overwhelming support from both chambers. And Dr. Elnahal, I am pleased that you're looking to expand our care in the community networks, but I also implore you that we need to be very, very concerned. I know you're very concerned. We all need to be concerned about the rising share of the medical account in terms of the proportionality of in-house care as opposed to care in the community. It can't just be we're going to expand the networks. We also have to get a handle on that cost. And that is what is also causing some consternation about VA's ultimate impact on other programs, since it is a non-defense discretionary budget silo that we have here. So on January 3rd, 2023, I will be sworn into the 118th Congress, where I'll take the oath of office. And in taking this oath, I'll be reminded of the oath that service members take when they are sworn into the military. Our veterans did not take that oath lightly. I would be remiss if I did not take my oath and position as incoming ranking member with the utmost regard for the population that we serve. So in conclusion, let me offer a rhetorical question. I will be honoring our pact to our veterans. Will everyone in this room be doing the same? Will those who wield the gavel do that? And will the VA do that? All members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. And again, I thank you for appearing before us today, and this hearing is now adjourned.